I want us to compare things and stuff. I don't want more letters.
Alright.
I don't know if somebody else wanted on the show, but the AC watchdog person's supposed to be up.
What happened? Somebody's whining.
Oh, whoever the AC watchdog is.
Oh, I saw that. I mean, I just saw, I answered one thing. Is there more after that?
Anyways, I said,
Show up at the
I said, you know what, come, that word come. Let's bring it.
I looked on the website.
Yeah, Mrs. Schultz, you're able to give her one more.
There you go. All right. Welcome, everybody. We'll do roll call, get this started.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes,
Mrs.
here.
Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Kern?
Here.
Mr. Rainier?
Here.
And Mrs. Young?
Pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first item on the list is to approve the agenda as presented. Is there a motion?
I motion.
Justin moves, is there a second? Stan seconds. Roll call.
Mr. Rainier?
Yes.
Mrs. Young? Mrs. Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes. Consent agenda. Items are, number one, accept minutes from the previous meeting. Two, accept resignation. Fifth grade intervention specialist teacher Courtney Matthews, effective the end of 1920's contract, and the bus driver Deborah Baldwin, effective 9/1/20. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Brandon moves. A second. Sue seconds.
Are they just leaving,
Mrs. Matthews took another job at Newark City Schools, and Mrs. Bowman is retired.
newer?
Yeah. She doesn't bowl.
Okay, that makes sense.
Roll call.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mrs. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Rainier?
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes.
We had no public
All right, we had no public participation sent in, so nothing to read off from that standpoint. The next item on the list is the treasurer's report.
In your package, you received the treasurer's report that included the financial summary, the 5-year board report, your fund sum, fin sum, the checks report, and that bank reconciliation at the end. So our revenues, May's general fund revenues were $816,591. There are regular revenues that are coming in, state foundation, investment, student fees, and our tuitions. You'll notice on the board 5-year report that our other non-operating revenue line is down substantially from this time last year. That's due to us receiving our Medicaid settlement last month instead of this month, like we did last year. So in our expenditures, our May general fund expenditures were $1,407,973. The total checks written for all funds in May were $1,787,660. Our total expenditures are $202,000 lower from this time last year. A majority of that is we expended all of our federal funds for our special ed for the ESC contract, along with not having salary and benefits for our substitutes from May due to COVID. So overall, our May general fund expenditures exceeded our revenue by $591,382 due to the way our revenues are received. Our total receipts to date are $15,247,464. This is an increase of a little over $464,000 from this time last year. And our total expenditures today are $15,433,294. It's a decrease of over 1.3 million. Again, we're not, we're at the end and we're not involved with those projects anymore. So last year was a heavy project year. Current general fund balance, $10,414,929. We do have a little over 1.7 million in encumbrances, which brings our available cash balance down to $8,676,944. Does anyone have any questions on the financials?
Those encumbrances, and I know that they're PO'd at this point. Do we see any of these not being spent due to?
Yes, we've already started this month going through, and any purchase orders that we know are not going to be spent for this year, we're closing those out. So you will not have that big of an encumbrance next month, this month. I also want to point out, back on your bank reconciliation, we did go in and do 2 CDs. And we got a decent rate. It wasn't a great rate because of everything in the market. However, it was better than what our money market was bringing in, so we went ahead and pulled that over. You'll see those new CDs down on the bottom of your bank reconciliation.
Jill? Is there a motion to approve the financial reports?
So,
Is there a second?
second.
Sue seconds. Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mrs. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm? Yes. Mr. Rainier?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes. All right, superintendent reports and recommendations.
All right, I would like to recommend we approve a 3-year administrative contract for special education supervisor Laura Lowe.
Is there a motion? Robin moves, second.
Second.
Brandon seconds, discussion.
She comes with 17 years experience as a supervisor in the Pike Cross PSC. Feel very comfortable in the selection.
Mr. Dick, what made her decide to come here after all those years of experience?
They did away with some positions at the ESC. I think my references I got, she was one of the highest paid. So unfortunately, how that works, you can find places for those people to go now. So.
Further discussion? All right. Roll call?
Mrs. Psalm? Yes. Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mrs. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Rainier?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes.
All right, I'd like to recommend we approve the certificated contract for K-5 social worker Courtney Ralph, 3rd grade teacher Lindsay Wolf, 4th grade Emily Hanson, high school intervention specialist Troy Langermeyer, and special education elementary resource room Sierra Warner.
Is there a motion? Sue moves, second. Robin seconds, discussion.
As you can see, very inexperienced group, but that's, we like that because it brings new, refreshed ideas to us, and they are all very hungry to get started. So, as soon as we approve them, I would like to introduce you to them. They're on the Google Meet with us, so I will let you know that before you do it. And just in case you've had this issue about the social worker, the K-5 social worker is replacing the elementary guidance counselor position.
Any further discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Rainier?
Yes.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes.
All right, let me unmute here just so we can. All right, I don't know how to tell you, but Sierra and Emily and Lindsay, I'm gonna roll you around the board here so you can see and they can welcome you. This is an unusual way to do this. This is not how we usually do this, so, but we do appreciate you being on board with us, and if you want to sign off at this point, you're more than welcome to. So we're not going to feel bad that you left us. So, but welcome and congratulations, and we look forward to working with you in some capacity this fall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, approve the 2020-2021 middle school, high school handbook. And go ahead, Walt.
Is there a motion?
With the middle school and high school?
Yes,
So, Brandon moves, there's a second? Sure. 6 seconds. All right, discussion.
all right, there were some questions brought forth by the board, that you responded to some other questions that we had in regards to it, and I would like to go through it. If you start on page 6, one of the questions was about, the hand sanitizer, and certainly we will remove it because of, at this time, it's,
Because it's not on your elementary one.
right. And I think they got a word before we printed this, so,
No, it wasn't on the original.
really.
Oh.
Okay, but the hand sanitizer will be removed. And I'm just asking if we can approve, with the suggested changes. Or I can bring it back at our meeting later on, so how you guys want to do it. And then the next item to be discussed was,
It's number 8 on page 10. Mr. Penn answered that he said he didn't understand. In the event a student is found in possession of a tobacco product, the student following disciplinary action will take place. So do they get all of that? Like I was asking, are they gonna get all that as a progressive? Because it says they'll get a 1 day out of school, a 1 day in school, required to enroll in counseling and all that. So does all of that happen? Or is it the first offense, you get the first one, the second offense, you get the second one?
it's progressive and,
Because that's not how it's worded. I asked if it was progressive. That's me in the red saying
Right,
progressive.
Mr. Henry, can you unmute? Wait a minute. There you are, I'm sorry.
Most of the time, this happens because of, nowadays, no, the first offense, the first time a student is caught, they are 1 day out, 1 day in, and they are signed up for the mandatory, by the youth intervention program. Is that correct, Mrs. Cochran? Yes. Youth intervention program through the recovery center in Lancaster. So that's all in the first offense of doing that. That's something we did, this past school year, we put that in last spring. I think it was last spring, I think we did it.
I'm not opposed to it. I was just asking, is it all of them?
Because we are, our concern is that this one all the time, or putting them out, or putting them in school is not necessarily the cure to becoming an addict or becoming, how you want to look. And it's our process of trying to educate them of the ills and harms of doing it. So
And most of the time, the 1 day out really works out to be that day that they're caught, just to get them out of the building. They have the tobacco, just get them out of the building for the rest of that day, and then they come back and serve the in-school restriction the next day. And then we get them signed up for the recovery center, the education part of it, and that. So normally it's just, we just feel we should just get them out of the building for that day and move on from there.
And down on the alcohol, Mrs. Solomon asked about no disciplinary action, why different than tobacco?
But it does show at the end of page 10 that the following procedures and penalties shall be in effect for students who are found to be in possession of illegal drugs or alcohol. I didn't know if that was
Where you got, Mr. Renier?
at the bottom of page 10.
Oh.
And then start of page 11, and it mentions, A, that you will contact the parents or guardians. B, you'll notify the Fairfield County Sheriff's Department. C, you may suspend the student for up to 10 days. It does say you will suspend them.
Mhm.
I didn't know if maybe that should be a will or a may instead of a will.
It's a will. Because I mean,
Yeah,
it's, in our world, it's not optional.
sure. Well, and I'm not opposed to that. I just wasn't sure. I mean, I imagine that you want it to be pretty open and shut.
Right.
So I get that.
Any other questions, Mrs. Song?
No on that.
Okay.
I had one oh, I'm sorry, you weren't finished.
No, I was.
Oh, okay.
On that page, I'm done.
Do you want to continue on? I
No,
don't want to
go on.
interrupt your role.
No.
On number 25, on page 6, all school dress code rules apply to bus riders. Most of that makes sense to me. The only thing I was curious about is in the wintertime, is there any good reason why students can't wear like a hat? I mean, I know why they don't wear hats in the building. The building is heated, and I know that the buses are too, but I didn't know if maybe that would be a problem with anybody, if we change that rule to allow students to wear, like a beanie cap or whatever you call it, and just in the winter months, maybe not a ball cap, because that's a fashion thing, that's not heating their head or keeping them warm, but does anybody have any strong feelings one way or another about that?
I would just say hat's a hat.
You know what, say it again?
A hat's a hat, maybe don't distinguish. I mean,
I wouldn't distinguish either it's a hat or it's not a hat. If they want to wear,
then you
I would
don't
argue
get
that-
into splitting hairs.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
I would
fine.
argue that a ball hat does keep you,
Sure, well, hey.
if you have a
Everything helps keep my
thinny
head warm.
hair
so.
or not a lot of hair, I don't know, it can certainly add some protection.
For simplicity's sake, that rule makes a lot of sense, but I do know that there are kids and parents who have expressed in the past that they would prefer it if their kid could continue to wear their hat at least while they're on the school bus. And I didn't know if anybody had any objections to pen and ink changing that.
I don't have any, I mean, part of it is it was the gang thing that
Sure.
at one time, I mean,
Yeah.
it can be, we can discuss it with bus drivers, how to manage it, and take care of it.
Sure.
Under, I'm not sure what page you were on, this is on page 18, what page were you?
That was on page 6.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's right.
So is that going to be struck?
We can strike that, or we'll put in there about, that's good.
And maybe give the, discretion to the bus driver if they,
Okay, what was the next one?
I had on page 18 highlighted, it's the hat, caps, hoods, scarves.
Scarves, yeah, we have no problem striking the scarf.
I know teachers wear them and they're a popular fashion item.
Yeah, we've talked about the scarf issue with the principals, and we will strike the scarf out of there. Page 29 will correct the paid athletic per season cost. It was in there because we hadn't approved that yet, or we haven't approved it yet, so. All right, that's all. The 4.25, on
I am
page
totally
23.
4.25 and I will vote no on this with that in there because I feel very strongly that when you have more than 10 children per class, that's going to be affected by that. You can put any pretty blouse you want on that. You are still going to have students that have a lesser GPA in those particular classes because they only got to take them out of 4.0 and they're at the exact same grade level. And there's like 3 or 4 classes. If you sat here and argued with me that you couldn't change valedictorian because one person could have taken one class as a freshman that put them over a 4.0 so they could be valedictorian, I don't see how you can change a grading scale midstream.
I don't know if that was ever the reason for valedictorian. The idea was.
Yes, it was.
There's 20 of them.
No, yes, it was. It took 4 years to implement that change. And that was the reason.
Is that how we would implement this one? We would start it with a.
Correct.
Because at some point we have to, if we want to be competitive with other schools, we have to implement it, but I hear what you're saying, so what would be how would we?
Started this fall. The advanced kids starting in 7th grade would get that. If you've already taken those classes, then you shouldn't have students that are all in the same grade, you're taking the same class, and some of them get a 4.25 with it, and some of them get a
Yeah.
4.0 with it.
I mean, I'm in agreement on that. I was just curious how we do implement it though, giving an extra, because that's what we're doing, right? We're giving an extra 0.25
Yes.
of credit, so we're
Learning
just,
advanced classes.
it wouldn't apply to current 8th, 9th, 10th, it would just start beginning this year with the first, the grade level that's just now
Seventh
eligible to
grade.
take, it would be 7th graders. So they would get 0.25, and then it would, moving forward, that's how it would go, right?
That's how I would see it going.
Unless we figure out a way to go back and retroactively give people that 0.25 credit hours, which seems logistically problematic, so.
This was just pertaining to a couple of math classes anyway.
Well, if
It
you,
wasn't
Well,
all.
it's 3 math classes, and it would raise your grade point of 0.25.
Right. Well, I'm
So
just
if
saying.
you
it's
look
not-
at the end
it's
of
not
the
for entire
year-
list year.
Well, but if you look at your class ranking and your GPA, that 0.25 is pretty big. I mean, the difference in some valedictorians is a hundredth of a
Right. Well, I just
percent.
mean for clarification, in case anybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
There already are a bunch of advanced classes that
It
are.
would just be the
4.25.
advanced algebra 1, geometry, and algebra 2. And I don't know about the advanced math, I'm not familiar with that class. Is that the 4th math class that they take as a senior?
well, it's not necessarily as a senior, it could be further.
The 4th high school math
Yeah.
class, I should say, if you take them in that order. But the math is the only thing that kids do is grade advanced. Everything else, the
Yes.
students would be in the same grade at the same time taking them. So if it was English, because there's advanced English 1, you could only take that as a freshman. You couldn't take that as a 7th or an 8th grader.
Correct.
I think the math classes should start. Could you start the advanced math with the current sophomores? The coming sophomores, if they took the 4th math class and they were grade advanced, they could take that advanced math at a 4.25. Right?
Yes.
So that, so you could start with the current sophomores.
Why would you start with sophomores? Just curious.
On just for the advanced math, because if you were grade advanced in the 7th grade, you'd have taken algebra 1, in the 8th grade, you'd have taken geometry 2, in the 9th grade, you would have taken algebra 2, and then
I
as
see
a
what you're saying.
sophomore, or as a sophomore, you take this advanced math, but your current people coming up would have that opportunity as well. Your current sophomores could take that advanced class and get the 4.25 that the other kids would take when they were senior. Is that right?
I don't know, may I ask Mr. Hinton?
Because if you,
Mr. Hinton, you there?
Yeah, we could just
no, I have
be
to
here
write it out
tonight
myself.
for conversation.
Okay. All right. So your question, Mr. Psalm, is about sophomores taking advanced math.
Well, just about starting.
My
at
question is about the 4.25 and the algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, and I think then the advanced math class. And this would be 9, 10, 11, and 12. So the current sophomores will be these, right?
Well, if you look at Mr. Hinton's chart in the back of the,
And they would be these. Mr. Hinton's chart is only talking about, it's not addressing the difference in the grade point average. He's saying that they have an opportunity to get a better grade point average, but they're still going to have a 0.25 less than anybody else for the same class. And it's not 1 or 2 kids. It's 10 to 18 per grade. Um, So algebra 1 would start with the current 7th graders,
Yes.
but the others, I think, can trickle down, right?
Nobody knew that, trickle down.
I think what she means is that the 4.25 would apply as long as it doesn't, as long as it wouldn't impede the fairness or the equity and how people have chances for that additional credit, so.
So your current, if your incoming sophomores were grade advanced, then so 10th grade, they would be taking this advanced math, which would be a 12th grade class. So your advanced math this fall, that senior level math could be at a 4.25, because every student who had the opportunity to take it in that grade level would get it at that GPA. Does that make sense? Kind of looking at it.
No, it does. And so then like the next,
So
whatever the next
then,
prior class would be,
the,
math class would be.
so the freshman,
Mhm.
the algebra 2 could start this year as well, right? For the incoming freshmen, algebra 2 is what they would be taking. So that could start this school year as well. So with the 7th and 8th graders, the current 7th,
Wait, Ms. Trenton,
8th,
what's that,
7th.
Ms. Trenton?
Are we trying to phase it in by,
Yes.
So then,
and still try to do like advanced physical science, still get a 4.25 this year, but
yeah,
algebra 2, so we're gonna have kids because we have in our advanced algebra 2, we have current sophomores, current juniors, current freshmen in our advanced algebra 2. So depending on the class you're in, it depends if you get a 4.25 core. Is that what I'm having trouble hearing it. Is that what I'm understanding that we want to try to do? So different kids will be in the class getting different weights?
well, that's what it currently is.
No, not in the same algebra 2 class,
We're the same
class
grade.
period.
same grade.
No. No, if you take, Mr. Hinton, if you take the current freshmen who are 9th graders, everybody in that current freshman class, whether they're grade advanced or not, will all have the opportunity to take advanced math as a senior, as a 4.25 class. Because none of them have taken it yet. None of them have had that opportunity to take it yet. So they would all have that starting in the 9th grade, 10th grade. But the 9th graders that are grade advanced this year would be taking algebra 2,
Yes.
right?
So in essence, anybody who takes the advanced math class sophomore or higher this coming year would get a 4.25.
Yes.
And then the next level math down, which is algebra, what, I don't know.
2.
Algebra 2, anybody freshman or higher who takes it
Yes.
this year
Thank you.
gets a 4.25. And then the next level down, whatever the math class prior to that, whoever is 8th grade or higher. Geometry, 8th grade or higher would get a 4.25. And then
Yes. In this, the
I guess
advanced,
the only curiosity is how, I don't know.
Yeah.
How big of an accounting nightmare is that?
well, I don't think it's that.
Maybe
I
not.
successfully got lost along the way there. So who's getting the 4.25?
Say it again.
Well, again, I guess the idea is to start it at the highest that you can, and so that advanced math class, sophomore, is the
first person.
Yeah, like the youngest that somebody could possibly be taking that class. So anybody who is a sophomore or higher, who was taking it this year, this would be the earliest they could take it would be a sophomore. That makes any sense. So a sophomore or higher would be a 4.25 for advanced math. Then, again, the next level down math would be a freshman, because freshman's the earliest somebody could be taking it right now. And
Because isn't that the point, is that you don't want somebody who, maybe they took this class for 4 credits, and now the next year, someone in that same class is taking it. They didn't take it last year, but now they're taking it, and they're getting 4.25.
But these people wouldn't have that yet.
Well, no, but you see what I'm saying? So like, let's say in 9th grade, somebody, or let's say 10th graders, they took Algebra 2 last year, they got 4 credit hours for it. And they're in 10th grade now. What if a 10th grader who didn't take Algebra 2 takes it this upcoming year and gets 4.25 credit hours for it?
But the way Kyle's saying it, that couldn't happen.
No, he said that anybody freshman or higher would be able to take Algebra 2 and get 4.25 credit hours. So that's what I'm saying, like, the way it was just mentioned is that the lowest grade level or above will get that 4.25 credits, but that doesn't solve the problem that you're trying to solve. You would need it to be anybody in this grade or below who takes the class gets the 4.25. Honestly, I think the easiest thing is just gonna be to say the incoming 7th grade class, you'll get 4.25 credit hours for these classes. Then you're not splitting hairs, you're not having to do all the logistical nightmare. Nobody who is 8th grade or above is any worse off than they have been. And the 7th graders will get phased into this new quarter credit, and it won't be nearly as problematic for anybody to try and figure out. So,
it takes up to 6 years to fully.
Well,
Yes.
only for
Yes.
the math though, because the, well, I don't know, it has advanced biology in there.
I don't see why we should treat any of the classes different personally. It doesn't matter whether it's math, science, history. If it's just revolving around credit, who gets the extra 0.25% and how much it affects things like you mentioned, class placement, it just makes sense. Treat them all the same, start them all on the same grade level. It'll take 6 years to implement, but that's the easiest, fairest way to do it, it seems.
the rest of them were already like that though, right? If I remember when this conversation started, it was just wanting to bump those couple math classes up to a 4.25. All the rest of it already are.
No,
No?
they're all 4.0.
So all
However-
of these are being changed.
Well, the math, several people have taken grade advanced. The ELA 1, you could implement, the math you could implement as a 7th grader, incoming 7th graders would start that. But the ELA could be the incoming freshmen, because they can't do that as grade advanced. So they wouldn't be taking ELA 1 for a high school credit. You do it,
I don't know,
no,
Mr. Henry,
they do accelerated.
do we do any
ELA?
acceleration in any other than math?
No, but, technically CCPE is
Yeah, they take it as a freshman.
technically, you know what I mean? But no, we do in ag courses, sometimes we do.
They're not, none of them are listed here, so
No, we don't, we sort of do in science a little bit by allowing juniors to take AP Bio, their junior year. So not really, not other than math. That's why math is so difficult. Because like I said, a current sophomore, going to be sophomore next year, really has 6 options in terms of their math courses they can take.
So the math is the big thing, but the ELA, so ELA Advanced 1 this year, so if they took that, did they get a 4.25 or is that a new ad as well?
it's all new. Everything is, nothing's been 4.25.
Nothing's been 4.25.
Yeah.
So then like the math would start as 7th graders. The ELA 4.25 would almost have to start with ELA 2, right? Because freshmen have already taken it. But they all took it the same. That's not a grade advance.
I still think the easiest thing to do is just to implement all of these with the additional 2.5 at the 7th grade level. Keep it simple. And then, and phase it in. That just seems like.
So we're
it's
talking
all-
about 5 grade levels and not having any advance.
They haven't had it all this time. I don't think it's gonna make that big of a difference. I mean, I wanna get these kids accredited as soon as we possibly can too, but just, I mean, you started at 7th grade, you phase it in.
But see, I'm not opposed to the rest of them because they would all be on the same playing field. Because none of these, if you started after the first 4 math, then you have that honors math and all the rest. There's nobody currently who would have taken that class ahead of their peers. So their peers will all take that the same year that they did. So advanced ELA 1, so I might be in a general ELA, but you might be in advanced, so you would get that extra 4.25. But we're both taking ELA 1 as freshmen.
And you would
You
both,
can't take that as an 8th grader. So
Good, Mr. Henry.
We do have students that are 3 years grade advanced in math too.
so how does that muddy the waters?
is there like 1 per grade?
Mr. Remy, for grade level, Mr. Henry?
There's not very many per grade level, but but if one is 3 years grade advanced, then you have to go out another class and that phase in another math level class. So really that would take you to calc, if you want to keep it by class, so say freshmen going to be sophomores, it would have to be calc AB. Or I guess they have the opportunity to advanced math, but I don't know how many we go from the honors block to advanced math. Most of the time the honors block is pre-calculus go to calc AB, because we have some that are 3 years advanced, 2 years advanced, 1 year advanced, and 0 years advanced. And so, you know what I'm saying? So if it's 1 in the class, then we would have to keep it on. So to me, it'd be calc AB, which is already on a 5.0 because it's AP.
So would phasing in the math alone, starting with 7th graders, fix that problem?
It fixes the math problem. I don't
Okay.
think it fixes the problem of our graduating class to be more competitive with the others in the area, but it does fix that problem, Mr. Renier, yes.
We gotta, this is one of those things where I feel like you gotta, take the good with the bad and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, in my opinion. But
I guess if we had any better ideas to just how many were, and it's all speculative anyways. I mean, how big of an issue is it in terms of scholarships for our students versus scholarship potential for other students based on the 0.25, if it's a 6-year phase in?
Well,
But you're
again,
getting all those others. They're having the opportunity to take all these other classes at the 4.25 and make that their grade point average.
Right.
Even if they don't take a CCP or anything else, all the ELAs, all the biologies,
it
all
seems like the
that.
best compromise that, where they get those extra credit for all the other classes, the only ones they don't get those 4.25s for are the math. And that starting with 7th graders and up, they will get it. But this also keeps it so that people don't get messed over on their class placement, which is also important for scholarships as well.
Question, how do the college credit plus courses work into this? Like, they're all on a 5 scale?
I believe they're on a 5, yes.
All on a 5 scale.
Yes.
So,
Which was kind of Mr. Henry's point, I believe, when we discussed it. You could take some others, if you're worried about maintaining your status, you could take other CCP courses
right,
and raise your GPA that way.
right.
It wouldn't have to be just solely through math.
How does that work if a student wanted to take a math course out of, like over the summer, CCP over the summer,
It'd be worth 5.
to gain more ground? So they weren't in the advanced track. They could take a 5.0 course over the summer
And we have
to
students
try
who do
to
that.
catch up.
We started that I believe, Mr. and I thought, we have students who are taking CCP courses this summer, and we'll take different courses CCP in order to
Right.
enhance the GPA.
Right. I mean, I see both sides of the coin here. I see Mrs. Psalm's point of, you know, it's unfortunate that you have kids in the same graduating
Sure.
class, taking the same course at different grade point average, you know, weighted differently. I understand where Mr. Hinton's coming from, trying to move forward and get, you know, our upperclassmen into that weighted scale as soon as possible too.
I'm fine with Mr. Rainier's solution. The math classes would start in the 7th grade and all the rest of them start now. Because that's a hunk of classes already that would get you up there. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 13 classes that you could do that with. So that gives you those kids, but it makes it a fair playing ground for the math classes. Because it's easy to say, well, you could take this, you could take that, but is that what you're willing to concede to, Mr. Dick?
Right? You're my boss. What you tell me we're gonna do, we're gonna do. I mean,
Well, I'll make a motion to amend it.
okay,
I make a motion to amend that advanced algebra 1, advanced geometry, advanced algebra 2, and advanced math. The 4.25 weighted scale start with the incoming 7th graders. All the rest of them can take effect this fall.
fall 2020.
I need a second.
the motion.
Sorry, Justin seconds the amendment. Is there, let's see, discussion?
Just seems like the best compromise.
Yeah.
To keep things fair.
Like I say, the only other thing would be, if we talked about it, but I guess it's not an option, would be just to go back and have anybody who's still currently in the system who's taking those classes, I'll bump up to 4.25, but that's not possible. So,
Okay.
all right, so that's the amendment on the floor. Any further discussion on that? Roll call.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes. All right, so now we're back, I guess, to approve the book in general.
We have a motion and a second for that.
Any other changes in the handbook?
Did we change the band back to the 75?
No, it's all gonna be 100. Well, it's gonna be all 100 for now.
Is that what we talked about, the thing with everything 100, or I thought they were less?
It's less than it was.
But the discussion was that it would be proportional, like we did with the athletics, because band has never been as much as athletics.
No, it hasn't, but it hasn't all, anytime that it's went down, hasn't went down proportionally prior to. So if we went down, are we on pay to participate, I'm assuming?
Well, no, that's really gonna ask that question.
Well, it's in here.
I did,
It's on page 29.
yes.
So we haven't approved those, even this change.
That's reasonable.
But we did talk about last board meeting that the band would be $75, I thought. Or at least we talked about that concept, but we never agreed. Or took a formal vote, but we did talk about that.
I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. I'm just saying it's different than what we had talked about at the last board meeting.
What is the current program?
125 currently,
And the regular was 175.
athletics.
Athletics is 175.
I thought we were just reducing them both by the same percentage amount, correct?
If we did that.
Roughly.
Yeah.
Round number.
Rough,
It doesn't
yeah.
quite match up exactly if you have the round number
Yeah,
of
if you're using
75,
that,
but
but yeah,
So it'd be 75 for band, 100 for anything else, and then you'd still give that 100 cap per season.
Yes. And once we approve the participation fees, we'll change up the handbook. So,
Because athletics, you have the 175 per season cap still in there, so you're gonna change that,
Yes.
okay.
we got that covered.
Yeah.
I don't want to belabor this one, maybe just a point of like inquiry, and we can discuss it later, but extra credit or additional credit, because that does also affect grades. And from a curriculum council standpoint, that's of interest to me. So I understand there's some teachers that do give it, some that don't. There's some teachers that give it, but they only give the extra credit, like 8 students could turn in a paper or something for extra credit, but only one student who gets the best grade out of those 8 students is the only one that gets the extra credit. To me, that seems very unfair.
I'm not sure I'm aware of that.
Okay,
No one's brought that to my attention, so.
well, I just, in terms of extra credit, and I kind of have a lot of mixed feelings about it. But maybe that's something that we can talk about some other time, just to keep this meeting on
Right.
track. But from,
I'm not an extra credit guy. so.
I've talked to, well, and I kind of get it. I sort of understand, but there are sometimes legitimate reasons why students might need to come and say, hey, is there something I can do to get extra credit? Especially this past year.
Sure.
Because not all students learn the same from home. And I was made aware by quite a few parents that there is at least one teacher who would give extra credit assignments, and it didn't matter if the whole class turned in extra credit, only one student would get that extra credit. And it might not even have been somebody that genuinely really needed it. They might have taken advantage of it, good for them,
Right.
but they might not have been in the same position as someone else who truly needed it and did the work, but just didn't come out on top and thus put the time and effort in, but was not rewarded with the credit. And that, to me, discourages people from going above and beyond or seeking out.
We can talk about that.
Sounds good.
Let's
Thank you.
talk about that. All right. Any other questions about the high school, middle school handbook?
All right, so then we were back then to approving the amended book with the
Yes.
change and the change we talked about specifically, I guess the one we amended with the change in that 425 thing. So any other discussion? All right, roll call.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mrs. Young? Mr. Rainier?
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes.
All right, recommend to approve the 2021 primary and elementary school handbook. We can start on page 4, the questions that I received from 2 different board members. We'll start with cell phones. I talked to Mrs. Marshall today. If most kids use them for iPads, if they have them, they've been disconnected, no. But some of them do have, but you ask the question about lockers, they don't have lockers per se, they have the cubbies. They're supposed to be kept away, they're supposed, and they're, at that age, most of them don't have it, so.
That's fine.
On the right-hand side, directory information, use of student pictures. Mrs. Young had sent an email last night, Mrs. Som had sent a question the other day. If you look, I believe you all have it in red, right underneath that, the district has designated the following information as directory information. You can read that. What I have provided you with is our policy, and I appreciate you reading closely because this is probably one of those things that has been in the handbook for years and no one's questioned it.
It was there last year and I questioned it.
But here is your directory information that should be in, that we would release. So what I would like to recommend is that we would cross out phone number, email, photograph, place of birth, dates of attendance, grade level, in the most recent educational agency or institution attended, which they would also figure that out. But we would, so we would take those things out and we would add the student's weight, height, the number of an athletic team. That's the one thing we would add to that particular paragraph.
So you would take out phone number
Yes,
and email,
email,
photograph,
place of birth,
okay,
dates of attendance, grade level,
yeah.
and most recent educational agency or institution attended. It's the last paragraph, that is the paragraph, for the last part of the sentence.
But then you're gonna add,
Students' weight and height if a member of an athletic team, and that would match our policy then, which is JO-R, which is the regulations.
Mr. Dick, we need to keep the word birth in there because it's date.
Date of birth, yes. We would keep date of birth, but we would take out the place.
gotcha.
And that language would be the same back on page 14 as well. I believe it's 14. 13, back under confidentiality, we would make that language be the same as the paragraph on page 4 and to match the policy.
I guess just to be, I thought with the grade level, I assume that in terms of you want to leave in the sports height and weight, so you put a program for sports. Usually when you're putting a sports program, you also include what grade level that is.
Right, but
There's no sports recognized in K.
No. the thing is, the date of birth would give them some kind of idea of what their grade level would be. So I think we need to Mr. Young's point, limit as much as we can by law to limit it, so. Now, the question was asked about how to make sure that's being protected. I gave you that one. This is the sheet that we sign each year. There's multiple things that the parent signs off on, and one of them is directory information. A parent can say, do not release any information at any time, not release make a prior written consent. So it does take care of meeting the letter of the law. We had talked with our attorney today, so.
Are you talking about here?
Yes,
That talks about military colleges
No, no.
and universities.
Well,
Oh, on down.
yes.
Gotcha, I'm sorry.
yeah, that's fine. So it does, we had talked to our attorney today, and she indicated that we need to have something in place. This has been in place for quite some time.
That's,
so.
that's perfect.
Okay. Let me see here.
My next question, I think, JP, was on page 7.
Yes,
It talks about disciplinary action, it talks about talking to the student, but it never talks about the parent being notified.
I would tell you it's probably an assumed one, but,
It'd be nice if it said the parent or guardian, whatever the proper,
because number 4
Term.
says an attempt is made to notify the parent or guardian by telephone if this one is required. So,
yeah, but that's not until then. The parent may not, according to this, the parent never needs to be notified if a student is presented with a notice of intended discipline. It's only
how
the
do you
student.
take that? Where do you,
On page 7, right here. Because it says the student will be presented with a notice of intended discipline. So you gave Johnny the notice at school of intended discipline, and there is no way he's gonna bring that home to Mama Bear, because Mama Bear is gonna be really mad.
and that's the reason number 4 is in there.
So Mama Bear may never know, but it doesn't get,
Number 5 is the notice sent to the parent. So I mean,
why not just put it up there,
up where?
up in number 1?
All right,
Student
4 become
and
number
or parent, guardian.
You got it. We will make it that change.
I didn't have a lot of this one.
The scarves will be the same thing. That's on page 8. Number 11, page 11, I'm sorry. You asked about the charges. This goes in line with Mr. Krennic expressed a concern last year about our charges. So they will still, they'll be charged, but there's not gonna be a secondary lunch. It will still be a type A lunch. We're still getting reimbursed for it. So, and we put the language in about graduation fees being paid. So we'll get our money. It just may be at a different time than we had anticipated, so.
Right, the wording's just funny. It almost sounded like can't have more than 3 charges. It even, I don't know. The wording was different.
Part of, we left out the word students.
Is that what it was?
If we struck no more than 3 charges permitted, there will be not a limit, there should not be a limit of 3 charges. We left out students are given a type A lunch according to USDA guidelines for the National School Lunch Program, or cafeteria account is charged for the meal.
Okay,
So students make a big difference in that.
yes, gotcha.
So we add
Okay.
that word. So,
I'm like, how to get it?
yes.
I got it.
In regards to immunization,
Contagious diseases.
yes, we need to get that in there about the COVID, so we will get that in there. But your immunization piece, we cannot deny interest on it due to a lack of immunization.
So why do we have that?
Well,
So by law, you can exclude them for 14 days, and after that, if they don't get it, they can come back to school? I don't care, I'm just asking.
no, but that's what, we're excluding them because of that's what the recommended guideline is for the COVID-19. That's different than the immunization piece.
Right, but I thought you were talking immunizations.
We are. You asked, there's nothing in the immunization about 14 days.
Yeah, there is. Children who do not have evidence of proper immunization will be excluded from school after 14 days. So then they're not coming back until they've documented proof.
That they
Okay,
have to give us a reason why they're not being immunized.
gotcha,
So,
gotcha.
Um,
So do we ever allow, is there ever an exclusion for immunization?
to allow them in,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
religious beliefs.
And there's certain medical
There's
conditions
medical
that,
conditions that doctors will say.
so like if
you
the
know,
doctor
yes.
signs off on it and says this child can't be because they're immunocompromised already or something like
Yes.
that, then they would have, okay.
That's the comments that people have had for me, and then, any questions about the primary handbook.
Will point out, and I don't just point it out, number 19.
Page 19,
I'm sorry, page 6, number 19, plus rules. It mentions no perfume, cologne, fingernail polish, combs, brushes, hand sanitizer, makeup, etc. to be put on while riding the bus. Hand sanitizer, with all this stuff going on.
You're taking that one off,
Yep.
right there.
That's
Oh, okay.
All right, cool.
Yep.
Did I miss that? We already.
no, we talked about it in the high school.
High
Talk
school,
about the high
oh,
school,
okay,
but
so-
not in this one.
Gotcha. So anything that changes for those
Yes.
will flow through. Okay. All right.
All right, so technically, we still need a motion and a second to approve the primary and elementary.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All motion.
Justin moves, is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, Robin, second. So we've got a lot of discussion already. Is there any additional discussion on the primary and elementary handbook? All right, all those, I guess, so. With the changes we've talked about. Roll call.
Mr. Renier,
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mrs. Young, Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
All right, I'd like to recommend we approve the Amanda-Clearcreek primary and elementary volunteering handbook.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Brandon moves second.
Second.
Justin seconds. Now discussion.
There has been this has been in place for several years, basically right now, we're changing the year, so, for our volunteers who come in. And since we have more classroom volunteers at these 2 grade levels, 2 grade bands, then we do it, goes from high school. That's the reason we feel it's important to put this in their hands.
Any discussion on that? Roll call.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
All right, I would like to recommend we approve the 2021 staff handbook.
Right, motion.
So
Brandon moves. Second.
Second.
Sue seconds.
the only thing that's got to change, we have not we approved the negotiated contract. There's a difference on page 6 with how snow days will be handled. So permit me to change it once the negotiated contract has been approved, and that would be the only change that you would have.
At one time, we had asked about missing days, like, I know there's no statute of limitations on the number of days that can be missed in a year. I know that it's not like a widespread problem, but that I remember hearing the number 80,000 a quarter being thrown around. Is that something that we wanted to look at closer and then possibly have some kind of a policy? I guess we wouldn't, or just throw that into a policy, though, that would have to be negotiated, wouldn't it?
Well, that, and we've talked about, and we mentioned the third thing.
Yeah,
The concern of, while we want people here, we gotta be very careful of not pressuring or pushing to the point that we have people who are ill coming to school.
I just worry about the folks who were taking advantage of the system
Sure.
before it was, I don't want to say lenient, but
Right.
as understanding as we're about to be, like, it's gonna, I guess the way I see it, it's gonna be even easier for those people who are already kind of abusing it to really have.
Right. And I think in the discussion we've had, I'm not sure there's a simple solution to that.
That's fair.
The,
It's obviously a small number of people too.
yes. And again, we're gonna do some of that ourselves. We're gonna police some of that. And this is Brad and I talked about, we talked about letting people know when they miss this many days or letting them know quarterly or something like that. So that we can at least bring it to their attention that, because I mean, sincerely, you want to make sure that people who are not missing are recognized for it as well. That when we say you haven't missed any days, this language that's, so we're working on that piece. I can assure you that.
One of the things that we had talked about was getting a committee together with some staff members to look at data on the past couple of years on attendance, so.
And that came out through the negotiations of how we can look at what days we are being missed and what time of year, those sort of things. So we are doing some work on those.
All right, and additional discussion on staff handbook. Approving. Roll call.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
All right, I'd like to recommend we approve the renewal of classified substitute contract as presented for the 2021 school year.
There's a nice big long list.
And these have been vetted by our principals, and so, and most of them have been used in the past.
So is there a motion?
I'll move.
Ron moves, second. Sue seconds. Anything else that? They've all been vetted?
Yeah.
Any other discussion? Roll call.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Kern.
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
I would like to recommend we approve the supplemental contract for the 2020-2021 school year varsity football assistant Jordan Grubb. And the following positions, the board has offered the position of middle school cheerleading advisor and middle school volleyball coach, 8th grade. For those employees in the district who have been licensed and no such employee qualified for those positions accepted them. Further, the positions were advertised and available to any individual with a license is qualified to fill them as unemployed by the board. Just so I think we need to do A and B together. Then Mr. Kern would be abstaining from the number 9. So we can go ahead and do A and B. So
is there a motion for the supplemental contracts for Grubb and Archer?
I'll make that.
Brandon moves, second.
I'll second.
Justin seconds. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Renier,
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mrs. Young, Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
All right, and to approve supplemental contract, having read the same verbiage in the paragraph above, for middle school volleyball coach Amy Kern.
Is there a motion? Sue moves. Robin seconds. Discussion? Roll
Aren't you
call.
glad you don't have to vote?
Brandon gets you there.
I ain't never for a change.
Mrs. Young. Yes. Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Renier,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Abstain.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
It's the renewing the contract is difficult. All right, I'd like to recommend we approve the following volunteers for 2020, 2021. Band, Madison Wharton, classroom, Rose French, football, Rick Johnson.
Is there a motion? Robin moves.
Second.
Brandon seconds. Discussion?
We're getting to that time of the year where we're gonna start seeing a lot of these, and I'm very appreciative of their willingness to help us the way they do.
Anything else? Roll call?
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mrs. Young, Mr. Renier,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
All right, I'd like to recommend we approve the 2020, 2021 paid participation fees, athletics $100 per season, cheerleading $100 per season, band $100 per season, extra for $25 per activity, with a cap of $1 per season per student, including any combination of athletics, cheerleading, and band. So obviously, we've had some conversation at this point, so
Yeah.
just put a motion and we'll discuss it.
All right, so the motion's there, so I guess we talked about the band being 75 though instead of 100, so. we can amend that there. Or we can just move the motion without it, huh?
I don't think we did make a motion for this, but.
Yeah, I would say that's true, we could just do the motion. That's 75 for the band. That's what we want.
Oh, yeah.
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 Yeah, I'll make that motion.
All right, so Brandon moves to do as it's listed, except band is 75 instead of 100. Is there a second?
Yep.
Justin seconds. Is there discussion? Again, it would be that cap of 100, so if somebody does band is 75 and they do a sport as well, they'll add an extra 25 and that'll be it, that cap. So, all right, roll call.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Renier,
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mrs. Young, Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
I'd like to recommend we approve the 2021 lunch prices as presented. Breakfast $1, PK 5 $2.75, 6 through 12 $3, and adult lunch is $4.
Is there a motion? Sue moves, second. Robin seconds. Discussion?
Fortunately, we didn't have to make any changes, except for the breakfast, so, the breakfast brings us more in line. And, if you may recall, the night we hired Mrs. Dunn last year, she expressed her concern about our breakfast prices raising, and now this gets us closer to be back in line with that. Yes.
Any other discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Renier,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
Mr. Kern, do you have a legislative liaison report, please?
I do. Probably the most important piece of education legislation right now, Senate Bill 319. Just newly introduced, some omnibus education bill that is taking on a number of different topics dealing with this, the impacts of what we've seen this school year and moving into next year, to create some guidelines. So, some of the notable provisions here, I don't think, Jill, that they've got some provisions stuck in here to address school districts who have seen significant decreases in their public utility property tax collections. We've actually seen an increase, so I don't think we're gonna fall into that category. The bill does allow for school employee evaluations, contracts, and furloughs. So, for school employees, teachers and principal evaluations, permits a school district that did not participate in the teacher evaluation pilot program from the 1920 school year, to continue evaluating teachers on a 2 or 3 year evaluation cycle. Even if the district completes an evaluation for them for the 2019-2020 school year, without, and this is the key thing, without a student growth measure. So there's this whole debate about student growth measures being included in teacher evaluation, so they're trying to make some accommodations for, the disruption that happened this year. It specifies a teacher who did not have a student growth measure as part of an evaluation for the 1920 school year must remain at the same point in the teacher's evaluation cycle and retain the same evaluation rating for this coming school year. Crystal clear? And I can send around kind of this bullet point summary. OASBO sent one around for us in our email, but this one's a little bit more detailed in the provisions. Authorize the school district to choose to complete a principal's performance evaluation for the 1920 school year without using student growth measure. So the principals, that's the same thing. That's the bulk of the evaluations. Furloughing school employees authorizes each school district board of education and educational service center governing board to furlough any school employee beginning on the bill's effective date through June 30th of next year. Next year, if the employee is not needed during the period or for financial reasons. There's a couple of provisions that kind of govern how that furlough would work, but essentially permits the furlough of school employees. Graduation requirements, a couple provisions trying to deal with graduation requirements, permits a student who was scheduled to take or retake an in-course exam in the 2019-2020 school year but did not do so because the exam was canceled. You can use that student's final course grade in lieu of the in-course exam to satisfy the conditions for graduation. Specifies a student who was scheduled to take an in-course exam. They may use a final grade for a course completed in that year, while the student who was scheduled to retake an exam may use a grade for a course completed in that year or prior school year. Third grade reading guarantee. It prohibits the State Board of Education from reviewing and adjusting upward the promotion score for the third grade English language arts assessment for this coming school year for 2021. And instead requires the use of the 1920 promotion score for next year. Any other highlights here? Final one I'll highlight here, services to special needs students permits non-classroom personnel providing professional services to students with disabilities to provide services electronically or via telehealth communication for the balance of the 1920 school year and for the entirety of next school year. So that was a big one.
Read that again. Say that again, Brandon.
Permits non-classroom personnel providing professional services to students with disabilities to provide services electronically or via telehealth communication through all of next school year. And actually there's one more. Requires Department of Education to develop an online 30-day training program to satisfy the classroom portion of the pre-service and annual in-service training for school bus drivers for their certification for this coming school. Let's give them e-version to take that course. I imagine there's going to be a lot of changes to the bill. I know School Boards Association was advocating for a few things that didn't get into this as an introduced version. So they're going to be pushing for changes. This just hasn't even taken the first step in the legislative process. So this will probably take on different forms here in the next. The big question is, all the talk on Cap Square is that the legislature is out of here after this week.
I was just gonna say, when's their summer break?
So I don't know.
And then we'll come back to after Labor Day, won't they?
So I don't know how this is gonna be a heavy lift. So I'll try to send out updates this week as this thing changes. I know we're supposed to have testimony on it tomorrow. So I'm trying to send something around.
Because like the bus driver thing is, something just being thrown in at the, so I wanted, I think, and so.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that goes on for the bills that they do, so.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's the big one. This will be kind of a moving target over the next couple days, but.
Thank you. Any question, Mr. Kern? Mr. Renier, do you have anything for us?
I will have, so there's actually a student achievement liaison, meeting being held via Zoom, and on, June 17th, and I will be doing that, but if anybody else is welcome to do that as well, I'll just email the group with the link, and the password if you want to jump in on that Zoom meeting. The whole point of like student achievement liaisons, and I kind of, we're all here in support of student achievement to make sure that our students are career college ready. And but some of the things that they did discuss, and I am now getting the emails, thank you, Mr. Sharp, after some to and fro with Mrs. Miller, I made sure I was on the list with the correct email. I think she originally had, my email was originally wrong, it was missing an I, so, but that's all been corrected. Anyway, they did reference guidance for reopening schools, but it's from May 19th, which, as we all know, it changes daily. Yeah, that's like old news. So we're still waiting on, that's from the CDC. We're still waiting on specific guidance from the state of Ohio. But they kind of foot stomp facilitating virtual collaboration, not just between students and instructors, but also between boards. And they have ways that they can facilitate. If we want to talk to other board members within our district, or not district, but within our region, there are some ways that we can do that virtually to kind of try and see if what we're thinking of doing is marrying up with what they're doing. And I know we kind of discussed that a little bit on Thursday, where a lot of what we do is going to probably ultimately be driven by some of the districts around us. And then also they provided some research on online teaching and also how students are responding in terms of motivation without getting grades, which quarter 4 was obviously different for us. We weren't, as you said, Mr. Dick, we weren't, was it content driven? We were more just, yeah. But that would look different for us if we should have any virtual instruction in the coming fall. So the big thing, and I don't necessarily agree with this, but there was quite a bit of discussion about whether or not grades, which, some schools, they basically said for that final quarter, you're not getting a grade. And there were questions about how well students would be motivated if they weren't receiving a grade. If I'm not going to get an A or B or C, why should I even do it? And then that brought into focus the greater, they say, greater overall question of whether or not this is even the right thing to do to be rewarding kids with grades in the first place. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't know how else you would ascertain, whether or not they're really learning without grades, but we could go into discussion about that at length some other time. So at any rate, to summarize, there will be a meeting, and I'll also summarize what comes out of that meeting and send it out in email format, and also the link if anybody else wants to participate. But that's the gist of the student liaison report for June.
Thank you.
All right, on to new business items. Item 1 on the agenda there is approve the transportation agreement with Bernie Union Local Schools for the purpose of transporting career students to Eastland from the Fairfield Career Center, which is attachment 5 in your packet. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Robin moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Brandon seconds. Discussion.
This is the, replacement. This is the second year we've had it burning, I believe. It used to be the town of Winchester. And Fairfield Career Center is the connecting point for us and burning, and they take our kids from Fairfield Career Center to Easton, and they pick them up at Easton and bring them back to Fairfield Career Center.
Worked well last year.
It worked very well.
How frequently is the payment?
Once we get an attendance on that, then we just go ahead and make that payment. They'll send an email out. It's normally by October, by fair break.
But it's an annual.
It's an annual payment.
That's
Yeah.
what I, because it just said $300 per student, but it didn't say how frequently.
Yes,
So it's annually.
annually, yep, up to 1,500. total.
Any other discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Renier,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes. Item 2, approve the purchase of 3 buses for the 2021 school year per the Meta Bus Bids Awards. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Rob moves. Second? I'll second. Discussion.
I thought that just last year I asked about the buses because I thought we deferred one last year and Jordan indicated we didn't really need them. So I was surprised to see the 3 on here this year. I'm not opposed to them, I'm just asking.
Well, we had talked about doing one each year.
Yeah,
Then, they came out with not a grant, what's a grant?
State grant.
That allowed us to purchase one at a much reduced price. So that's the reason we could do.
is
It
that
kind of goes on there.
like 72,000 or something? Is that what I read?
We,
Say which attachment.
there's not any attachment because we got the bus bids back in the fall. So if you look at, our board notes on page 6. So our bus cost is $92,522, and that's for each bus from Meta. And then we did defer one from last year, so we didn't buy one, well, this school year. So if we put that one over into next school year, starting July 1, so then we went ahead and did the third one because of that bus grant, and the bus grant was $49,762.60 towards that.
Is that only if we buy 3 buses or we went with it? Because what did we originally approve for this year's purchase?
One bus this year, but then we had managed to put it over from last year and move it to 2 buses this year because we didn't purchase it last year.
So we should have purchased 2 this year, but now we're gonna purchase 3.
Also the reduction.
And the grant only applies if you buy 3,
No,
No,
so we would still get the grant if we bought 2.
yes.
Why don't we just buy 2?
I want to try to upgrade the fleet as you have asked us about trying to do.
I just asked.
No.
I'll be honest, I think that I'm all in favor of upgrading the fleet, but if Jordan said we don't need 3, and we had planned to buy one last year, and we plan to buy one this year, given all, in light of all the money stuff that's happening, I feel it would be prudent to just buy the 2.
I will be honest, Mr. Lee has never told me that he didn't need them. He's actually came in and asked if we could get 2 additional ones.
In addition to the 3.
He wanted 2 every year. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct.
So
Last
In
year
order
we
to
didn't get any.
last year we did not buy one, and I think the main reason was because some of them were back ordered. Is that it?
One of the reasons we hadn't got the levy yet either.
Yes.
I-
So we were holding off on that.
I think we should stick with the plan that we had before, which was to buy 1 a year. I understand we didn't buy one last year, but, so I'm fine with buying 2 this year to kind of make up for that. But I don't see why we should deviate from the plan that we had, especially right now, given that we have an uncertain fiscal climate ahead of us. It doesn't make sense to me to say, we had this plan, we were gonna buy 1 a year, now let's go ahead and buy 3, even though we know we're just gonna get a big hit from
Well,
a financial standpoint.
I guess this is where we get ourselves in trouble with not having a capital plan. The capital plan calls for one year, 2 the next, and 1 the following. So there's a year where there was 2 being purchased in the plan. So,
That's this year, or when?
well, we have deferred buying buses for quite some time. So,
For how many years, Jim?
At least 4. The rotation prior to the levy coming up for passage was 2 buses a year. And then Jordan was pulling that in for, I think it was 5 years. And then we could get to a rotation of 1 a year for that, because we have some older buses. So with the reason for 3 was because this bus grant does call that we have to get rid of a bus. So in order for us to buy and use this grant, we have to use a replacement and get rid of it. We can't keep all of our buses and
So we,
So that
Is it
makes a
1 for
difference
1?
then.
is it 1 for 1 or just 1 bus?
it is 1 for 1. So if we use that grant for 1, we have to get rid of 1.
I see. So if we buy 2 buses and we have to get rid of 1, we really only got ourselves 1
One bus.
additional bus.
Correct.
But if we buy 3 buses, we get rid of 1, we actually now got ourselves 2 buses.
2 buses,
That makes a
yes.
difference.
Okay, that does make a difference.
Okay, and so the other part of that too is we had done, sorry,
That's okay.
$200,000 is what we have in our forecast to budget for that.
Mhm.
With that grant, it would be 227 coming out of that general fund.
The 200,000 was for how many buses? For 2.
Yes,
So what you're saying is with this grant, we're really getting a 3rd bus for only 27,000 more than we had originally budgeted for.
correct.
Okay. All of that makes a lot more sense.
and I'll tell you, I know we gotta get rid of the bus, but when we talk about, some of the bus issues that we may face in the fall in regards to how they want kids transported, we gotta be, use an extra, but then again, I'm not saying we should buy but 3 buses just to have them around
Let me ask you a
because when people
question.
come back.
What if somebody donated a bus? Just a question. How does that work? Does that count as, you know what I mean? I mean, I guess you gotta maintain it at that point. You gotta,
Exactly.
you gotta have a driver for it and everything, but
There would have to be a lot of inspections and checks to
Gotcha.
make sure we're taking on someone else's problem.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Because we get probably something at least twice a week of used buses for sale.
when you get rid of a bus, how do you get rid of it?
Jordan usually puts out for bid that people will,
Buy it. So if somebody were to buy it, say, a member of the business community that wanted to buy it and then donate it back, is that, you're not get, you know, I mean, it's, obviously it's an old bus, but you know that bus. And I'm just asking if there were any legal problems with that?
we would look into it, but I don't know what they'd be.
Okay.
Now, again, the problem is that it becomes the driver, front.
Well,
put the
I'm
bus
just
seat.
thinking in my mind as a backup.
Sure.
As a member of the transportation committee, and it's been months since we've
Yeah.
met it, obviously, but Jordan was in the meeting, and so was at least one bus driver. They could go down through and they could say, oh, yeah, that bus, that's a piece of, yeah, we don't want that bus. So I'm assuming that those are the types
The
of
ones that
buses
get rid of
Yes,
that
they'll be the
we're
first ones to
thinking
go.
of, cash for clunkers kind of deal.
Because I mean, Mrs. Thomas brought it up several times, and in regards to the age of our fleet, and OSBA would tell you that they get very concerned when the buses are over 10 years old. We have buses over
Yes.
10 years old.
We do.
So,
Well, give us the list.
yes, so.
I will also tell you, from going through and doing this with Mr. Lee the past couple of years, he goes in and finds out what our trade-in value is, what the bus company would give it to us for, and that is our cap for that. So that's the least amount that we will take for anyone putting in any bids,
Okay.
because we know we can trade it in for that amount. The other thing is once we know that, they take as many parts and pieces off that they can use on other places too, if we know that we might not get that amount, because those pieces and parts are expensive, so if they can reuse them,
Sure.
they take anything and everything off that they
Good. Well, that's
can.
good, good to hear, good to know, good to have it stated out loud.
Mhm.
Thanks for the clarification.
Any additional discussion? All right, roll call.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Kern.
Yes.
And item 3, approve resolution to allow the treasurer to make advances and transfers to various funds as needed to keep the books balanced through the end of the year and to certify accounts. Is there a motion? Robert moves. Second. Sue seconds. Discussion.
This is just at the end of the year when I have to make any transfers to make sure that we're not negative. I don't usually do any advances. It's usually all just transfers like into athletics and things like that.
Discussion. Roll call.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mrs. Young, Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes. Item 4, approve final certificate of estimated resources for fiscal year 2020, attachment 6 in the packet. Is there a motion? Ron moves. Second. Sue seconds. Discussion.
This is for next fiscal year, we have to have this sent to the county auditor's office before we can spend any money. We usually do 75%. One thing that I did do is I did 100% of our FY21 budget for our bonds. That's for our mortgage here for the buildings, along with the principals have already set their building budgets, so those are at 100% also.
Additional discussion. Roll call.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes. Item 5, approve the final appropriations for fiscal year 2020, attachment 7. Is there a motion? Rob moves. Sue seconds. Discussion.
Just our last appropriations.
So what are the difference? The document you provide doesn't show any difference between what's been appropriated and what these new appropriation levels are.
The only changes that you'll look, the general fund, I believe, is exactly the same. The only appropriation I had to decrease was our federal fund in the 516, I believe it was by $2,300 or $2,700. And it's because they had backed off some of the appropriations for that federal grant.
Which one is that?
The 516, which is our special ed. Yeah, it is on page 2. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, the 6th one up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th one up. It was like 301.6 something or something. I'm sorry.
Same number though, it's attachment 7, it's the 516 was, the idea part B grants? Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's
So that's
about,
the only change from what we last approved.
Yes, I believe so. I don't think there was any other changes. I'll look at it for sure, because I usually have that spreadsheet on there. So,
any additional discussion? All right, roll call.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mrs. Young, Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes. Item 6, approve temporary appropriations for fiscal year 2021, attachment 8. Is there a motion? Rob moves, second.
I second.
Justin seconds, discussion.
Sorry, I explained it in the first one. This is our temporary appropriations for next year.
And these are at 75% of.
Of what we've already spent this year.
Right.
Yes, and then in September, we will have to do our permanent appropriations, and that's where we will have that budget document that we had. So that'll all go together in that for our permanents.
But we did talk about changing that, right? Isn't that kind of what we discussed
I would like to see it change.
previously, where we're not appropriating money? I mean, I don't have a problem with September, but like, isn't this sort of like what we discussed, we're putting the cart before the horse?
With the capital thing?
For the capital, we're planning on bringing the capital back. No,
I'm not talking about capital budget, I'm talking about operating, but annual operating budget.
okay. So what we have done was 75% of that, and then we go in and we'll have that, for our permanents have to be in before that October 1, so we would go through all of the budgets for that budget document and have that discussion.
We have to meet a statutory requirement of this
For the-
timeline?
Yes, for the temporaries,
For the
they have,
temporaries.
yes, they have to be at the Fairfield County auditors in order for us to spend any money starting July 1.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Rainier brings up the point that I was gonna make, and that, I've said that I would really like to see an annual operating budget process where the board is presenting a budget. And, then after that's approved, there's a coinciding appropriation recap sheet that's presented to coincide with that approved budget. And, I have a lot of trouble approving appropriations when this board is not considered an operating budget, it's not presented an operating budget. We haven't approved an operating budget. I made the point that I think that budget document that you presented to the finance committee is an excellent tool. It's one that should be brought in front of the whole board for approval. So I continue to struggle with this process because I think this is a primary function of a board, of a governing board, is to review budget and to approve a budget, so.
So we will be doing that, but it would be not for the July 1. Are you wanting a permanent budget set for July 1?
I don't think we can't use permanent, right? I understand things change, but I think there's gotta be a budget proposal that comes to the board earlier than that.
Earlier than September. So we would have a finance committee or something prior to that to discuss everything before the budget comes to September 1.
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, ideally, we would have been doing this spring, right? I mean, ideally, we should see a proposed budget for next year. Because the fiscal year starts July 1.
A lot of the proposed budget is in the 5-year forecast also,
Yeah,
because we're
but-
looking at,
It's not presented in the same way, and the 5-year forecast is not an annual operating budget. It's not the same.
no, it's not the same, but it's showing what we are looking at
I'm
and,
just saying what I'm asking for. I'm not, what I think consistently asked for, and it's been months and months and months, that we have an operating budget be presented to the board, that it be approved by the board before we do appropriations. I think I've been pretty consistent in that, so that's just where I am. I just have a hard time approving these appropriations, having not seen an operating budget be presented to this governing body.
So Brandon, are you asking that this type of document that we're looking at now, number 8, should have been presented last month and then we can approve it?
No,
Or what are
no,
you-
I'm saying that the operating budget that you and I saw at the last finance committee meeting should be presented as a proposed budget for this coming fiscal year, right, which starts July 1. And the
Gotcha.
board should have considered that as a framework for what we are approving as a budget, as an operating budget for next year. And then this is an appropriations document that coincides with that and says, per your approved budget that you've approved
This is how,
prior, this is what we're
Gotcha.
allocating for that framework that you've already approved.
because as it's happening now, we're looking at a budget and we're saying, well, we have already kind of set money aside, we've already appropriated money for this.
Right.
And then that becomes like the driving reason why we should approve it. And again, and coming from a contracting background, I kind of have a hard time saying, well, we should just approve this budget item simply because we've already set money aside for it, when we never really fully discussed, should we set money aside for this in the first place, or how much?
Right.
So in my head, next month, we were bringing back capital plan to look at, because we would want to look at that in July. So that when we're doing that in August, we bring the budget back to be able to look at, because we need to approve it in September. Is what my timeline thought process was. This is doing it a little bit different than what we did before, even though this is a 75% to be able to get us started, looking at the budget and the capital plan in July, the budget then looked at in August for a September permanent for that timeline, which is what the state timeline is. You're wanting to pull it back to the spring so that we're talking about it in spring, so the permanent is actually in June for July 1 start for permanents.
In terms of when we pass the temporary appropriations versus permanent appropriations, you know, as long as we're complying with what the ORC says we have to do in statute. My main concern is the fact that we haven't been presented an operating budget at all, right? And I think that should happen in the spring prior to the fiscal year starting. Like, I think the leadership team should be able to put together what they say they need for to operate the district next fiscal year, which we're going into it in July. Now, we would have already approved a framework, an overall budget for how you're going to spend money next year. And then this document, whether we do a temporary still at 75% under the time frame we're working with right now, that's fine. We can appropriate 75% as a temporary. That budget may need to be adjusted. It happens all the time with organizations. We may come back in September and say, there's recommendations from the leadership team that we need to make, slight amendments to the budget you approved in April or May, or, whenever we decide it's best to do it. That's fine. We can amend it through the year if amendment is warranted. But I think we need to be thoughtful in our approach and consider an operating budget in the spring before the fiscal year actually starts. And that should be something that I just feel strong should be presented to the board.
Okay, and I don't have a problem presenting it. I guess my thought of the timeline of doing it so that it had the presentation was before permanents had to be in. So from now on, we'll start this in the spring so that in June, we're approving a permanent or temporary budget. And we know it's temporary, but it's more permanent than anything starting July 1. So it would be approved in June. We would have discussed this in May, April, and May. Is that what you are thinking timeline-wise? Okay. So April and May discussion. June approval. Starting July 1 with full permanent appropriations.
Again, the appropriation documents are not what I'm concerned about. Other than I'm being asked to approve them without having seen an operating budget proposal. So I'm approving overall appropriations into a budget that we've had no insight into. So whether you call it a temporary, I don't care, like comply with what the ORC says in terms of when you bring these appropriations documents to the board. It's the operating budget that's considered prior to these appropriations documents that is more important than these important.
Okay, and when you say operating in my world is just the general fund, but operating for you, is that all funds? Because a lot of times by June, we don't even have our federal numbers.
Right.
Okay.
It's a budget, right? And we're approving a framework, again, it can be amended throughout the year.
Okay.
I don't think we're not saying it has to be concrete, but at least we've got some insight into it prior to entering the fiscal year.
Okay.
How we're going to approach it, how we're going to spend money.
Okay. I got it.
Will we see something like that for 2021? Or are we waiting until next week?
No, we'll have that for in July. We'll have it started.
Okay.
It has to start then anyway.
That's,
So yeah.
So we're, just a little bit, but I like the idea, and rather than thinking of it as being permanent or whatever, it more like it's an annual budget. This is what we're thinking of for this coming fiscal year.
Well, and really, if you go on Brandon's timeline, you do proposed budget there in June, but then you probably do a revised budget in August or September before you do your final appropriations. Because then you have your numbers and then you're more
Right.
online with where you're going, and then you would repeat that in the following year.
There's a lot of changes in the summer with staff and everything, so.
Right.
At least should be, I mean, at that point, you're kind of fine tuning, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
what we do in the spring should capture most of, I can't imagine that
But once you
we
do
should
it,
have a, right, I mean, we should have a pretty solid framework for what a budget should look like. We've got an idea of what our expenditures are. I mean, I think that the bulk of it should be in place by the spring.
but once you get into the habit of doing that, then you'll be able to financially forecast, okay, well, we don't have this information for these couple of months yet, but the last 3 years tell us this is what the averages we're doing on salaries because we're hiring teachers or whatever the variables are in that time frame. You'll be able to look at your history easier and be able to estimate better your proposed budget. You'll be closer than when it comes August and September for your final.
I'll be honest, I do with the way that our spreadsheets are set up with the 5-year forecast, a lot of our forecasting is close to what our salary, especially our salary and benefits, because we can kind of figure out what's going to be changing. It's just who actually leaves in the summer is the majority of it. But that 5-year forecast is what I'm looking at basically when we're going into doing any kind of major budgeting. So, and just like for this one, any of the projects that were in there that we paid out this year, those are not, that 75%'s already been taken out, because I know we're not going to have $1 million roof budget then, so that's already been taken out. So things like that I know we're not going to be upcoming, that's not part of the 75%, so I do look at that.
But I know you love the 5-year forecast, and I know you do. And I'd asked before that when the final one came out, there was a miscommunication on my part, but I think this is important to look back the last 2 years as it is to look forward. And to have that data. I sent you a spreadsheet, I think last summer, a different organization I'm in, and how they do that, because usually you have 2 or 3 years of what you proposed and what was actual. Because then that helps you look forward and say, where was I off? Because maybe there were reasons you were off, maybe something happened like COVID struck and no one ever knew, those kind of things. I just think it's nice. It's important for history and it's important to look ahead. You'll get a better.
And the way that you do that, I do that, but I do it as my actuals in May, because I can look back and go, okay, and that's when we did that comparison, so I could go back and say, okay, what was off by 3 or more percent? Why was it off by 3 or more percent? And looking at that, and that's when we look at the May to be able to say, okay, this didn't happen, but it did the year before, so that's what we look at.
Yeah.
Okay.
When are we actually required to pass this temporary appropriation?
At any time in June, it just has to be to the auditors by the last day of June, so we can start closing everything out and doing purchase orders July 1.
I had mentioned in the notes about a June 29th meeting. Does this help us if we can, does it, this record?
Well,
Right.
yeah, if we would, are you expecting a full-blown budget presentation before the 29th?
No, I'm just, does that help us if we were to table anything tonight? Does that doesn't give you much time on the 30th, that's the night before.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm okay if we proceed tonight. We've done it before during my term on the board, but I gotta tell you, like, this is probably the last appropriation, temporary appropriation motion that I will vote in support of if I haven't seen some sort of operating budget presented to the board prior to it. moving forward, because I just feel that strongly about it. So, I'd really like to see us have something in front of us in July, or August, certainly before we do our permanent appropriations in the fall. I just think it's important that we consider a budget and approve it, so.
Okay, but we'll move that whole timeline back to start in the spring so that those are done by July 1. So in June, that full budget will be ready instead of by September.
But we want to back it up if we're going to
I don't
vote
know,
on,
yeah,
if we're going to vote on a budget in June, we've got to see it starting in April.
April and May.
Yeah.
Yes.
But again, if you have under statute until the fall to pass your permanent appropriations, I don't know why you would limit yourself by voting on passing a permanent appropriation in the summer. So I do want to see an operating budget ahead of this deadline in June. But I'm still fine, just to be clear, I'm still fine with doing the permanent appropriation later in the fall to give yourself enough leeway that if you have to come back and amend the budget, you have time to present it to the board, we can amend it, and we can move on. So.
Okay.
I mean, when you're saying moving everything back, I'm not talking about moving that vote on that permanent appropriation back any further than what we normally do. I just would like to see an operating budget ahead of any, at least a proposal or a general framework as a starting point before we do any of these appropriations.
Okay, so, okay. And so for July 1, if we're looking and wanting to do this starting in spring, we pretty much have a permanent ready to go July 1.
I mean, we should, right?
Okay.
But we don't need to, as a board, necessarily vote on permanent appropriation if we don't need to, right?
It would just be proposed.
It would just be a temporary, full
For us to
temporary
make other
instead of
decisions based
75%.
on-
I mean, I think we'll probably have a lock in, but as you said, things could change over the summer, so.
Right.
The fall, we're still giving ourselves that flexibility to make adjustments.
And if it starts in April and we don't vote on it until September, that gives us plenty of time to.
Okay, so if we're still talking it over after six months there for permanence, are you okay with the 75% then starting July 1 or what we've got at that point in time? I guess, and for me in my treasurer world, temps are just to be able to get us started. It doesn't mean that that's our full appropriation. It's just that we know how much we spent last year. We know pretty much everything's going to be going on salary and benefits wise. There might be some changes in that. We already know a lot of our contracts that are coming in for like the ESC and what our historicals are. So that's why normally you do the 75% because it starts you for the first month of July, and that's when you start your talk for the September 1. So if we're going to start in spring and try to get something, a temporary might actually be our permanent because there might not be a lot of change afterwards. Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding.
It's why Congress, uses that 80% for a continuing resolution. And our hope is to just be better than Congress and have a budget sooner and, not be operating.
Whatever it is, to function as Congress, so.
I guess, yes, I shouldn't say that, yes.
This year.
So I think basically the nutshell, the idea is we would see an operating budget and.
Before the fiscal year
Yeah, have
starts.
one to look at, whatever, and then you can base your 75% on that, but we wouldn't actually submit the permanent final one any earlier than September anyways to the state. Because we could tweak it between, but it may well be what we said,
Okay.
but there's no point in submitting the permanent one until September, we have to make some tweaks, but.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
but at least we.
Theoretically, we should be there, but why limit yourself to making an earlier vote?
Well, maybe the term for it is proposed budget, temporary
Yeah.
proposed budget, because that would go in line with your temporary appropriations.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Then it wouldn't be as confusing.
No, I like a temporary budget. I like a budget to see what it's going to be. If you have to change it, then yes, you can, but I I would prefer not to have a temporary budget. See, this is the budget that we plan to enact for the coming year. Does that make sense?
Okay.
All right, any other discussion with that? Although we were back to approving the temporary appropriations for 2021. Roll call.
Mrs. Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Renier?
Yes.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mrs. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes. Item 7, approve the agreement with the Fairfield County ESC for the employment of personnel shared services for the 2021 school year, attachment 9. Is there a motion? Robin moves, second.
Second.
Brandon seconds, discussion.
This is reflective of us bringing back the current supervisor to us as a local position as opposed to the purchase service through the ESC. The rest of the services remain the same, with an increase though in the one special education aid.
Discussion. All right, roll call.
Mrs. Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mrs. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Renier?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes. Item 8, approve administrative salary schedule, changing the title of director to supervisor, attachment 10. Is there a motion?
I motion.
All right, Justin moves, second. Brandon seconds, discussion.
This was confused last month, so we just cleaned it up and took director out everywhere and used only supervisor, so.
Discussion. Roll call.
Mr. Renier?
Yes.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mrs. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes. Item 9, approve the purchase of a scoreboard at the football field from Megalith. Is there a motion?
I'll do.
Robin moves, second. I'll second.
One of the things we've talked about for quite some time is, one, the age of our current scoreboard, and two, the ability to create some alternative revenues. And many school districts have moved to this type of a scoreboard in order for us to sell sponsorship to hopefully create that revenue. The bids that we had received, one of the companies, they had quote unquote was the leader in the clubhouse for a long, long time until the very end. They told us that if they went and helped us get any sponsorship, they would keep the sponsorship dollars that
That's
they went to get. That was Daktronics. Megalith told us they would help us in anything that they had helped get. They would take 10% this year, and then that would be the only year they would take anything from the revenue source. So, Jill created a paper for you, a little bit of a spreadsheet that, not sure, most of you do not know, the Booster Club just purchased a electronic scores table for the gymnasium. So, that was just received either last Wednesday or Thursday, I believe. So, we're gonna create packages to sell to our sponsorships that would allow them to basically be a sponsor at all of our activities, with the exception of baseball, softball. We would not have this one, but we talk about selling or continue to sell our signage. We could potentially do that. We could sell sponsorship for the scoreboard down at the football field during track meets, soccer, and football games, obviously, and then indoor during volleyball and basketball. I don't know if we can do it during wrestling because of the way wrestling is configured, but certainly if we could, we would. But we want to create packages for our sponsors that would allow them to get the most of the dollars that they would obviously help generate for us.
So the scores table for basketball is getting a new, something that can do advertising
Yes,
as well?
it has graphics on it as well.
And is that at the scores table or is that up?
That's at the scores table.
Okay, so it would be like on the floor and not
Yes.
just scores, okay.
I'll be honest, Mr. Henman and this is, I talked about we could purchase some of the big screen TVs at like Best Buy or something, put them up and get the same effect as we are outdoor. But right now, with the score table as it is, the Booster Club purchased, you know, this helps generate some income that Mrs. Bradford and I talked about that we had not been able to generate in the past. And obviously, there's a place where main anchor sponsors, and there's a place where next level sponsors, and there's a place for 5 next level sponsors. So basically there's a place on 10 places on scoreboard to buy sponsorship. This is if any of you went to the Taze Valley game, this is the exact scoreboard that Taze Valley has. It's state of the art. It's Daktronics came in first. It was a much bigger scoreboard, and then when Megalith came to us and gave us their proposal, Daktronics then decided we asked them to size it down to meet the thing, so we could compare it. Yeah. In fact, Megalith does a lot of installation for Daktronics. That's how Megalith got their start, was basically installing electronic scoreboards. And then they took it upon themselves to go out and start the visual piece, the electronic piece. So, and the way we found out, there's a local community member who helps work for the company that installs for Megalith. So that's how we came up with Megalith as opposed to Daktronics. There's another company that did, I'll be honest, it was scary low. I didn't know for sure what kind of scoreboard we're going to get, quality. So, and they were a second-year company, which concerned me. So they basically were taken out of the consideration list. So.
Do we have any idea how much the shipping is?
He told me today, $2,500. And he said 10% above or less. So he, that was a feasible number. I mean, it's not off the chart bad.
Question.
Sure.
So how are we gonna go about selling the advertising? Because we had this discussion in the fall before the levy, and I thought the decision was that, you know, we were gonna hold off, and there was gonna be a team of people go explore and talk to potential companies that would run advertising, try and get commitments ahead of time before we did any upfront expenditure, to try and diffuse the amount of the upfront expenditure that the board would have to spend on this investment. So I'm all for alternative revenue. I guess I just want to make sure there's a solid plan in place to ensure that we don't make this large investment as a board and then there's no follow through.
Sure.
Or there's follow through, but there's just not enough interest in sponsors to generate the type of dollars that, you know, we had expected to. So where does all that stand?
We have made contacts with sponsors, potential sponsors. We have had one who said they would be the anchor sponsor, which is a big one. So there's been no formal talks. We had the list that was created that's the reason once we approve, we will go. Because our biggest concern was renderings and what's it look like, what the package is going to be like when we go to sell it to somebody, basically. So we have a list of who we would go to basically for 4 secondary main sponsors and then 5. And we have a list that's been created by Mr. Young and Mr. Geiler, Mr. Evans, Mr. Henton, and I created and talked to different people. So obviously we're going to try to keep as much from Megalith as possible as in regards to what they go out and generate, because obviously that keeps money in our pocket and we can do it. So,
Who would be the main people responsible for soliciting the ads, and then how does that flow of work? And you've got the person who's going to do it, and then how does that cash end up here?
They present us with a contract that we would, Mr. Evans would do a lot of this. Mr. Geiler said he would help us hunt down, sponsors. Obviously, myself, I would do part of that, or as much as I can, to create that. And then those dollars come directly to us, and then we would pay that mega lift out. One of the reasons we talked about, that this would then generate that revenue once we got it paid for. And I agree with you, Mr. Kern, I know where you're coming from in regards to, I don't want a three-headed monster set out there or something we can't generate funds off of. Right. So, I think with the package that we're creating, we'll be able to help sell it. I really do, because of, obviously we don't have the big type businesses in Amanda itself.
Right.
You gotta go outside, and we've talked about car dealerships and those type of things that, that we have to go after. Obviously, we've got a beverage company that, they tell us in our contracts that they don't put anything towards scoreboards. But we walk up to Tays Valley and there's their logo up on the scoreboard. So, somebody has to, so those are the type of things we would go after.
Are we gonna have any fans in the stands?
Well, I don't know. And I don't know.
If you're by the restaurant, anybody want to see that advertised? If you go by the restaurant scene, yes. But who knows what the governor's going to say between now and then.
Or what you just said. So I guess I'll just say, I wonder if there's a path forward here that looks a little more certain for the board, or we put a little more concrete framework around what this looks like. I mean, is it possible for us to approve a rendering of what we would be willing to invest in, but that we're not going to actually make the purchase until we've secured commitments from, X amount of sponsors that represent, a path towards financial solvency for this type of investment or something like, that is what we talked about in the fall. And my thing here is why we change course from now we want to purchase it up front and just hope that we get the advertising dollars in the back. Because I very specifically remember in September or October having a conversation about we're just going to put the scoreboard, to the side for now and go out and work to make sure that we've got advertising dollars lined up prior to making the investment, to avoid that paradox of not knowing.
Stating the obvious that Mrs. Young has already alluded to was that the optics of going forward with this purchase could look really bad if we move forward with the purchase and then the guidelines come out saying you can have sports, but only immediate families allowed to attend, or no more than, X number of people are allowed in the stadium, gymnasium, what have you. And then all of a sudden now, we're not going to get a lot of sponsors because bang for the buck isn't going to be there. And, there'll be members of the community saying, oh, I hear you spent X number of dollars on a brand new scoreboard that I can't even go see. I just feel like if we don't have to vote on this today, maybe we put this one off until we learn more from the state and possibly more about, potential advertisers.
I guess the flip side of that is how soon, this would be in place for this
Yes.
season, though. I guess the question is.
When did we get these bids, if you know? Pre-COVID?
Yes.
Because we have negotiating power now. In my mind, again, going back to contracting, which is what I do on a daily basis, we can go back to the people that gave us these bids and say, hey, listen, things have changed. And if we do move forward with this, we are having to tighten our belt. I'd like to see what you can do to tighten your belt. And I can't imagine that you're selling too many scoreboards right now. And this, to me, it's the same as if you're trying to buy a car right now or anything else in the market that's going to be, we just, in a way, because of this scenario, we just gained ourselves leverage to go back to them and say, I need you to sharpen your pencil. And we would be foolish and as fiduciaries, and we would be, I think we would be doing the school district a disservice if we didn't do that, given that we have this newfound leverage.
Can we table it until the end of the June meeting? I don't know if that gives you enough
Sure,
time or not.
absolutely.
Do you need to just go back to them and say, because if they offer us a great deal because of the COVID and their lack of sales, might be responsible, like you said, to go ahead and do it now.
Well, and at least we could say we asked.
Yeah, we have.
Because if we don't ask, if we don't go through that motion, then it shows, a real lack of, it just would not look, the optics would be very bad, in my opinion.
I'll make a motion to table it until the special board meeting in June, where we can get more information.
And I second that.
Probably moves, Justin seconds. Additional discussion? All those in favor of tabling, roll call.
Mrs. Young, I'm sorry, Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mrs. Young, Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
I would like to make a motion to table the resurfacing of the track for very similar reasons.
Second.
All right, so Justin moves. Brandon second, what's that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll let you finish and then
Justin moved, you second. So discussion now then, in terms of tabling the track issue. My only thing I would say that's different with that is we've been budgeting for the track and there's really no revenue change. Now, one
That's
thing we
true.
would look into would be.
That's what prices, and that's,
Potential better
again,
price.
I don't want to understate the fact that, this is an opportunity to go back to these companies and say, hey, things have changed for us, you have to recognize that, and what can you do to help me out here? It just seems like the responsible thing to do. I'm looking at this how I would run my household, and I have done this, with every significant purchase that we've made over the last 3 months. And I have found every time that it has been successful. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, and
Can we discuss a little bit about the different types so that, Mr. Duke's not having to do both?
I'll just, if I may too, I'll be honest, I understand that Bricker and Eckler said that because it is not attached to the building, it does not have to be competitively bid. But that means it's not required to be. In my mind, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be. So just because it's not required doesn't mean it's not in our best interest. So statutorily or legally, Bricker and Eckler said you don't have to from a legal standpoint, but from our standpoint, I feel like we stand to benefit almost every time from competition. That is just the capitalist, way of things. And especially given the current climate, we would have additional leverage in negotiating a lower price. So yeah, anyway, I made my motion.
So, and I'm not opposed to that. I explained the difference between the latex and the polyurethane. Does the polyurethane last longer? Is that
Yes.
why it's more expensive? And how much longer does it last? Does it do something more special?
Right, and this is where we have a latex track.
That's what we have now.
Yes.
And how long have we had that? Do we have any idea?
I'm not sure when the last time it was resurfaced. I know, Joe, we did an insurance claim, but it wasn't the entire track that was redone though.
Not at all, I think it was like $38,000.
Yeah, we've had it painted a couple different times, we've had it patched. I don't know that it's been, I don't think it's been thoroughly completely replaced since it was put down in the summer of '94.
Okay, so we've had it a long time
So-
then. Okay, I was just curious.
So when you talk about, that's why I know people, why are you getting a latex when you have polyurethane? I'm not, again, I know my name. We're not probably not gonna get 24 years out of the next 26 years out of the next latex track. But the material they have, the polyurethane is it's what a lot more higher level competition takes place on. latex just does not wear as well in regards to, we have repaired this one several times in regards to holes that freezing and falling underneath will raise up the layer of latex. So,
Would you say, Mr. Dick, that these upfront savings is still beneficial when you add in all of the repairs? Or would the repairs negate the upfront savings?
and I do not know, I mean, I don't know what the polyurethane does. I mean, I should ask her to cut, like, I asked Logan, but this is their first, I had polyurethane. So I don't know in this area how many
Schools
it has that will tell you how it is wearing better than a latex.
And is the warranty different on them? Is the warranty for latex is X number of years versus polyurethane?
Yes, there was,
additional years?
there was a difference, and I will get that during the competitive bid after that, so.
And I wonder too, like, I think you said it was put down in about 1994.
Yes,
I think it sees a lot more community use now than it did
Sure.
in 1994. And if we're not gonna shut that down, you can go out there almost every day in the
It's nice
summer, which is fine. I'm not disagreeing with that.
Right.
I just,
So I guess then for the reason for the motion to table it for now is that we can, if in my opinion, this would be better suited to, in light of what we have going on, be competitively bid. And then we can ask these questions about, warranty to those competitive bidders. And we can also find out in the interim some information from other schools. Why did you go to the polyurethane track as opposed to, the latex, or not latex, but the poly, yeah, thank you. I mean, they saw benefit in it somewhere. So maybe we ask them.
Reading through these two, well, they don't really seem to be apples to apples. They, the two, proposals, the one has more exclusions, including excluding that they'll have a bond, which obviously we would want them to have. The other one has 1.5 feet of mill to where the other one is 1.5 inches. The 1.5 feet is in there twice, so it's not like it's a typo. If they're truly, why would you have a typo in a proposal?
well, I would say it's a typo because I don't think we have a 1.5 feet of anything there.
Exactly, but then they go on to say how
Yes,
much
compact,
material
yes.
they're going to use, and when they state the material, so, okay, so if they go over that material to finish the job, who has to pay for that additional? Do we have to pay all the overages?
Okay.
These just don't seem to be,
Well, the filter from Benon is, there's no latex proposal. There's a polyurethane track.
And the polyurethane is supposedly better.
Yes. And what you do is you add those two numbers, the site work, and then either the DSS 100 or the DSS 200 for that first number under site work.
and on the site
looking
work,
at the numbers as much as just what they were
Sure.
saying they were gonna do. I don't know what the D area is, but the.
There is a high jump pit right behind the goal post.
Okay, so the other, I'm not even sure that that was addressed.
And the D area was never discussed as being a possible. I mean, I know Mr. Evans, the guy talked to Mr. Evans about doing it, but I mean, we, in my world, never considered doing it because of the expense.
Is there a scope review with, like, was there a general? scope
Yes,
of the-
um,
On the RFP?
yes. Well, we never put an RP out. We went down, met with them and discussed what we
I
wanted.
see.
So,
Okay.
Any additional discussion on the motion to table this? Again, what's the, in order to get it ready for whenever it needs to be ready, when they need to start?
well, we would have to have take some action in June. So, and again, it depends on what happens in the fall. I mean,
Well, this buys us time to find out, what guidance comes down from the state in terms of if we can have fans in the stands. And not that this is about fans, because this is
Sure.
about the athletes, but just in general, what this athletically, what the school year is gonna look like. And also, I mean, again, I'll just say, I'm always a fan, even if it's not legally required, of a competitive bid process. And, any bids that were received pre-COVID-19 should be revisited. So,
And it may affect their timing as well.
yeah, material and their ability to adhere to that schedule as proposed. I'm surprised they haven't just reached out to themselves to say that,
Yeah, there was nobody in there. when they-
unless it benefits them greatly. Sure.
All right, any additional discussion? So the motion to table. Roll call.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mrs. Young, Mrs. Psalm,
Yes,
Mr. Sharp.
Yes. Item 11, approve policy DBDA, cash balance, attachment 11.
Make a motion.
Brandon moves. Second.
I second.
Justin seconds. Discussion.
I believe attachment 11 does reflect what we have discussed at this point. So,
Additional discussion. Roll call.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm,
yes,
Mrs. Young,
yes,
Mr. Sharp.
Yes. Item 12, approve the board resolution regarding distance learning attachments 12 and 13. Is there a motion? Robert moves. I'll second.
This is a document that the record had indicated that we should do and follow through with, in which we have done it with the resolution tonight and with the Exhibit A explaining how we took care of our distance learning during, while we were not in school, from March 16th until May 21st.
Discussion? Roll call.
Mrs. Psalm,
yes,
Mr. Sharp,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mrs. Young.
Item 13, approve the board resolution regarding superintendent and treasurer authority, attachment 14. Is there a motion? Rob moves. Second. I'll second. I'll second.
This is, again, a document that Rick Ecker had indicated that we should do. It doesn't change anything. I would recommend we keep it at the $50,000 mark. I don't want to increase it to any number other than what we've always permissible for us to do now, prior to COVID-19. So,
is that the blank dollar?
Yes.
Down there, it's
yeah,
50.
50,000. Which is what we currently have a policy now for Mrs. Bradford and I to make that purchase at that point.
So what's the need? So it doesn't change.
No, it's kind of our
just
question.
Not, it's just not currently codified, is it?
What's that?
I mean, is this already in writing somewhere?
The $50,000 piece? Yes.
Yeah, I mean.
The Rick and Ecker said that we should do it because of the COVID-19. I reread this thing multiple times. I don't understand how it changes anything for us. That's the reason I don't want to change the number amount that Jill and I are permitted to use.
Because in all reality, whatever my budgets are, I'm not going to be able to go over them. We've already set them, so we don't understand exactly why we have to have it, considering we already have a budget set.
Well, this should be an open and shut.
Yeah.
there's no harm in doing it.
No, there's not.
So,
All right. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes,
Mr. Sharp,
Yes.
Mr. Rainier,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
yes,
Mr. Kern.
Yes.
All right, item 14, approve agreement with Perry and Associates CPAs for audit from fiscal period July 1, 2019 through June 30, 2022, attachment 15. Is there a motion? Sue moves. Second. Brandon seconds. Discussion.
So we went through the state auditors for this, the bidding process. There were 5 of us in the bid, a couple other, I think there were 3 other Fairfield County schools that were let off of state. So basically, when you look at this, we're going to be saving about $9,300 annually from the state audit because they're already set at 16.9. So they are an independent audit firm. And they'll start this year.
Discussion. Roll call.
Mrs. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mr. Rainier?
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes. Item 15, approve the agreement with Circle Physical Therapy Incorporated for services for 2021. There is no change in charges. It is attachment 16. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Brandon moves. Sue seconds. Discussion.
This is a cheaper route for us to take and less expensive route to take than using the ESC at this time for our physical therapy services. And we have dealt with critical physical therapy for quite some time now. So, and they keep the prices very competitive and they still remain less than what we pay otherwise.
Further discussion. Roll call.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
Mrs. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm?
Yes.
Mr. Rainier?
Yes.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes. Item 16, approve the urgent necessity resolution for the replacement of the chiller. Attachment 17. Is there a motion? Robin moves. Second. Sue seconds. Discussion.
Mr. Kern asked me about non-competitive business, and I didn't think I had to because of our contract or state agreement with GTC, who we have a contract currently with to do our maintenance. That state agreement does not allow them to quote unquote do the chiller within that state agreement. When we talked to legal told me that had we come to them in April, May, when we decided to do it, they would have recommended a urgent necessity resolution then to stay with one company, to stay with a company. So if you read the resolution about the concerns why I would prefer we stay with general temperature control, that is the reason I'm bringing it back to quote unquote do it with a resolution as it should have been done last month. So.
Trying to ask what options did Bricker and Eckler present alternatively to this resolution of urgent necessity? Are there other options that we can pursue to ensure that this thing's done properly?
They didn't give me, I think give us, do you recall, Mrs. Bradford, when we talked with them about, that they would have recommended urgent necessity. And using the rationale that I used to try to keep general temperature control to do it was important to them, they said, to Bricker and Eckler. So they did not give me any other alternatives to pursue.
When did we become aware that the chiller needed replaced? It was when after Air Force One was gone and
we had extended a contract with Air Force One to repair that. We had the particular chiller. GTC thought they could get it working, but when they came to us with the $85,000 price tag to rebuild it, to get it running again, that's when we thought we needed to. We had an $85,000 chiller that was 17 years old.
But this was when?
Well, July 17th.
So, this is just me. We've known there's been a problem. And in my mind, not getting competitive bids and now waiving the need for it is not, it this urgency hasn't been, in my mind, it's not a true urgency in the sense that it's something that just happened and it has to be fixed right now. It might need to be fixed right now, but it didn't just happen. We have created the urgency. So, regardless of how we vote on this, I am going to propose that at some point we make a policy that we just competitively bid everything over a certain dollar limit, because unless there is a really good reason not to, there's just no reason why we shouldn't competitively bid everything that we possibly can. That's how the rest of a lot of businesses work, because they're the bottom dollar, counts, every dollar counts. That's how the government works. I don't know why we're the exception, but this, in my mind, is somewhat of a manufactured urgency, just due to, and the other thing, whenever you put things out for competitive bid, it puts everybody else on notice. GTC might not be giving us their best price because they don't think that they have to. They know we're not going with Air Force One. And until we put out a solicitation, where's their incentive or motivation otherwise? They're the inherent, winner of this just by due to the fact that they already have a contract with us, but that doesn't mean that we have to pay them. That doesn't mean we have to go with them.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Rainey, and to the point where if the project gets put back, it's of our own doing. And I'm completely in line with the need to do competitive bidding. I cannot bring myself to vote in favor of a resolution that declares there's a necessity, given the circumstances behind this one, so.
Did we ever get money from Air Force One?
Nope. We're lawsuit dates February 21st, the court date.
So if we do get money from them, it would just be recouping what we pay.
What we had paid GTC at this point to get it repaired.
And this would be in with it.
Well, yeah, right, sure. I mean, for all we know, we may be wildly successful in litigation and Air Force One ends up paying for the full. I mean, in a perfect world, they end up paying for a whole new chunk. We can dream. But I feel like just acting in an abundance of, I don't want to say caution, but I don't know. This is just so different from what I've always been taught, trained, and how we do things.
The chillers is that for the AC?
Yes.
I mean, does it currently work?
No.
No.
Only one of them is working.
What portion of the building is it?
It runs all of it. The issue is that because it was run the way it was run, put so much strain on this one that it has basically burned up.
Gotcha. But, so I guess to maybe Mr. Sharp's point is, what happens if we do delay this?
Right. And that's
We'll just run the other one full blast.
And that does put more strain on it, obviously, but if it gives us 6 months,
So the one,
I don't even think we need 6 months. Sorry.
no, I thought you were finished, I'm sorry. So the one that's currently working, not the one we proposed to replace, is that the one that hasn't worked all these years? They got it
It was
working?
not working, and they shut it down in 2012, and then run it again until,
The one that you're asking to replace, or the one that's currently functioning?
the one that's currently functioning is the one that was shut down in 2012.
Okay, and then CG, whatever, they are,
GTC,
that one, they got it running.
yes.
But we put so much strain on this other one that now it's dying. Okay. And then how long does it take to install a chiller? I have no idea on that kind of thing.
They said like 3 or 4 weeks, but they're probably, he told me 6 to 8 weeks behind in regards to getting it delivered because of the issues they're having from factories that have lay people off, on the people for,
So we wouldn't even get it before school started
No.
anyway.
probably not.
Okay.
Which makes going out for competitive bid, I think, even more advantageous because there might be other companies that could act on it before school. Or at the very least, GTC will know they're not the only game in town. It's just you never get your best price for anything from a contractor when they know that you have to put out a solicitation for bid. Because why should I, if I'm a contractor, why should I sharpen my pencil if I know I'm the only game in town? I have no motivation to do that.
I'm not opposed to getting a competitive bid. You know it's gonna be that long before they can even get it in.
Has the motion been made? Oh,
Did we move to the second, but we have not, we're discussing.
Yeah, we're just discussing it.
I have a question. Since we already voted on this a couple months ago, is the contract already in place? Are we committed with GTC?
He's ordered it, but this wouldn't be the last thing, or first thing we've changed to this board, so that's fine. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, I was
We're
wondering about that.
changing it. It's the lack of following the Ohio law that's changing the circumstances.
So I thought we've already approved it. The purchase of it a couple of months ago,
Yes.
but this is asking us to say that we bought it because it was urgent.
That's fine, we can
So how
take,
much longer before it will actually be in? If it's over, have they already started the process? to
I do
get
not
it
know
here?
that when I talked to him, he said it had been ordered, so I don't know what that means.
Because that makes a difference if it's on
Yeah,
its way.
Yeah, if we've committed, that's.
Right, well, then he's gonna say he's incurred costs. He'll say, I had to pay for it up front. So, but I guess if nothing else, let this just be, for me, like a foot stomping moment of why we need to do this every time, which is competitively bid.
Doing it.
And I don't disagree with you, but since we've already gotten it, I think we almost have to approve this because otherwise, we told the company, yes.
If we've entered into a contract, yeah, I mean,
We've entered into a contract with them to get it.
Have we entered into a contract? I requested a copy of the contract and I've never been provided it.
Well, maybe that's not the right term, but we approved it as a board, so
right, but the question
They
is,
ordered it.
we might have approved it, but did we enter into a contract?
I don't know, what we sent him the PO, he sent me the,
We did, wasn't it already in the
So
board packet?
there's a
when it
difference
went?
between a purchase order and a contract.
Right.
And the difference becomes whether or not there's a bilateral agreement with a signature. So if there's no bilateral agreement of a signature and he has not delivered on anything, we could even have a purchase order and cancel that purchase order unilaterally in most cases without any repercussions. And hopefully, and one more reason again, that I feel like we should always competitively bid things is because we can put in our solicitations, the school district has the right to cancel before work has been performed. There's like a whole bunch of provisions that you can put into a solicitation that I don't want to say completely indemnify us, but protect us in cases like this. What if it was something that wasn't necessary, COVID happens, or some other thing, and all of a sudden our priorities change, we need to adjust that budget. You know, if nobody has executed on a contract, then we can say, hey, things have changed. But as it stands, we're just not doing things that way. So I would say we need to table this until we find out if we have a signed bilateral agreement with GTC. If there's no actual contract, personally, I would push to competitively bid this. If we've already signed a contract and it's binding, then I'm with you, Robin, I think that changes things. But I want to table signing this until we find that out.
Second.
Okay.
That was a motion.
Yeah,
To table
Justin
this.
moved the table, Brandon second. Any additional discussion then? All right, roll call.
Mr. Renier,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes. All right, item 17, now we're on discussion items. Second reading for item A, change to policy GDV, support staff contracts and compensation plans.
This policy we had last meeting, and it just changes the contract sequence to what ORC stipulates. It used to be a,
Two-year thing.
yeah, it used to be a 1-2 continuing, and now it's a 1-2-2-2-2 continuing.
Right.
And that came from OSBA.
So we don't need any motion there, that's just any other changes. And the first reading for review with changes to policy CCA organizational chart, attachments 18 and 19.
Should we, under the middle school and high school, the athletic director, are they still the athletic director or are they the supervisor now? Do we change that?
No, they're still athletic director.
Athletic assistant,
Athletic assistant.
athletic director duties. Where's that?
If we're changing it.
Right underneath the middle school
Right
principal.
under middle school, right under high school, to the right of them,
Should be athletic assistant.
is assistant the right word? Okay. I didn't know. Is that what his official title is now?
We're keeping an assistant principal position slotted in the high school.
Yeah, we should have been taken out as well.
To take out that whole block?
Yes.
19.
Well,
It's attachment 19.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna ask for sequential numbering of the whole agenda.
you know what else I asked her for help?
Today I thought I had her send me the agenda. She said, just the agenda.
No
No attachments, I guess then I can.
Open the attachments.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
Under high school
But
principal.
even if they were sequentially numbered 1 through 81, that would be super.
All right, anything else? Other than Xing out the high school, middle school assistant principal box from under the high school, changing athletic director to athletic assistant. Policy GVRA, Family and Medical Leave Act, expansion, attachment 20.
Okay, so these Family Medical Leave Act expansions, C, D, E, and F. So, well, we'll just work with C, D. Family Medical Leave Act extensions, everything remains the same for family medical leave, except for they add that you can take FMLA for COVID related. So, normally that is not something that was allowed, and they're adding that in. There are sections on there, if you look at attachment 20 and 21, where when we were going through, we scratched, these are brand new, so we didn't have these policies prior to. So what we had scratched there was for intermittent leaves, and we normally do not have that, especially with our teachers and staff for the intermittent leaves. We have done it prior to, but not for the COVID related. We can choose if we wanted to do that or not. So we had just chosen that they had to take the time altogether instead of intermittently for that. And that's the same in for attachment 21. For the intermittent leave, you'll see that that was struck. And those are the options that we could choose if we wanted to. Okay.
We had just a policy change in the sense that intermittent leave was in our policy book, and we're removing it.
Intermittent leave is in our FMLA policy because it's federal guidelines for regular. These are brand new policies. We do not have these policies, and they are new because of COVID.
And the intermittent is not required in these like it is the other.
Correct.
So the federal government is saying we'll accept COVID for FMLA, but we don't have the intermittent as a requirement like we do the other FMLA.
We can have that as an option.
Got it.
And with the way that our school year is with staff, when we had talked about it, intermittent leave does cause problems with substitutes and the kids having the instruction and things. So intermittent leave was, that option was taken out.
And
This
you're,
is
you should also,
No, go ahead.
I mean, and you're a nurse, you'll know better. Once you get COVID, you don't get it again, right? So there wouldn't be a need for COVID specific.
No.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm asking,
Blanket
that's why I'm
statements.
asking the healthcare professional, because I don't know.
I think you're talking more about, my guess is you're talking more about, say somebody with cancer and they're on an FMLA that's intermittent where they get chemo, so a couple days every 3 weeks, they're not able to come in.
Right.
Versus COVID's more, either you have it, you can't come to school, or you don't have it and you are, it's not an intermittent illness like a long-term other
Yeah.
illness might be. But yeah, you could get it more than once, because there's two strains,
Sure.
there's an
Well-
Asian strain and a
So then,
European strain.
what if my wife gets COVID and,
And then you get it later.
later I get it? What if my child gets it? I can't send her to the babysitter, I have to stay home with her. And then, at some point I get it.
That would be a little different. We wouldn't consider that intermittent for the mere fact that if you're one of our employees and you get it, that is your own illness. That's COVID for just you. If your child ends up getting it and you need to stay home with your child, that's different because that's not you now. That is for family leave for your child who has it.
Gotcha.
But it wouldn't be intermittent if it was two different blocks of time. So like, if your
Yeah.
first child got it,
Yes.
and then your second child got it, but you were back to work for a month or whatever.
Yeah,
The intermittent is more work today, gone tomorrow, work the next day, gone the next day.
tracking.
Yes.
Okay,
Am I right about that?
that clarifies, I really appreciate it, thank you. Do we have a policy on what teachers, what staff should do if they have a family member that tests positive? Do we have a policy for that? In terms of, if you live in the same household, do you need to quarantine for 2 weeks until you have a negative test or anything? We might want to look at that because, if we have a staff member who has a teacher or a staff member who has someone at home, a family member, that tests positive, do we really want them coming to work? And then what does that look like in terms of how long do they stay at home? How do we pay them? And what's the criteria for them to come back to work?
I can tell you from a healthcare perspective, it's all over the gamut.
Yeah, sure.
Some places, they're pretty adamant, if somebody in your household has it, you don't go to work. Some employers let you come back after a certain number of days. So if somebody in your household has it, then 14 days after they were exposed and you don't have any symptoms, you can go back. Some are requiring a negative COVID test.
I think for us,
It's all over
like,
the
we're not
place.
able, we won't be reasonably able to easily socially distance. If you're a teacher, social
Oh,
distancing
yeah,
is
no,
gonna be hard.
no.
And so, I just feel like that's something we probably need to get ahead of and address because, it's not someone coming in and sitting at a desk, it's someone that's coming in and interacting with 20 plus students, so.
When we've had anyone who has done that, we've always called the health department and kind of followed what those CDC guidelines are for the 14 days of quarantine,
Mhm.
their home. But we can certainly ask Brooker to find out if there's any policies
Yeah,
that are made up for
for
COVID
schools,
right now.
that'd be a great idea and we should, make the policy as soon as possible. It's good to know that that's happening, but.
The emergency paid sick leave, 22 and 23. These are brand new also. These follow the federal guidelines that just came out. These are our policies that we have not had before. So this just basically says that if you get COVID after a certain day, then, and I think that date was, I believe, April 1st is what they had originally told, yes, April 1st. So through, and they've extended it through December 31st. If you run out of sick time for that, you get 80 hours of emergency sick time leave that you're not deducted from at school here. So we have, we've already implemented that when this first all came out. We had talked to legal. We had a couple people with that. In those instances, we had talked to legal on that. We were already following that. So it's good to know that these policies are just now coming out to follow those federal guidelines.
Is the federal government taking money for that, just out of curiosity?
There's supposed to be some, I've heard of some kind of reimbursement to come through, and we've only used it for one staff member. That it's working through work, unemployment. Yes. So once we find that information out to be able to get that back, if we can, we'll be able to do that.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just clarification, what we're looking at on these. This is Ohio School Boards Association generated policy.
Correct.
What is the highlighted and struck through?
The highlight and struck through are the ones that are optional. So when we had to go into it, we had to look at all of this and say, okay, what is it that you want to do for your school district? So when Mr. Dick and I have looked at that, the intermittent leave was one of those options that we could or could not do. And in talking through everything with how our staff is with the students, we did not feel like we wanted to do the intermittent leave.
On this emergency paid sick leave that we pay up to 80 hours of sick leave, even if they don't have that in their bank, are we able to recoup that from their bank? So the next 80 they wouldn't earn, or?
No, that is emergency leave given by the government mandating that we give it to them.
Okay. I just didn't know if there was a provision where they earned it back. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Okay.
But it's specific to COVID, right?
Specific to COVID.
Like page 1 of attachment 23 is actually blank. I don't know if I'm the only one.
Yeah, mine is too.
I don't know what it says, or maybe there's nothing struck out on page 1 of attachment 23, but it's not.
Our time's up with number 2, if our employee has worked less than 6 months.
Let's get that blank page. Should be
Maybe it was the wrong, it's down on the.
GB, that's just the one. GBRA dash R.
Oh, yeah. The reasons 1 through 3, the
Yeah, it
notice,
starts
like,
at 2,
okay, I
yeah.
don't know where these reasons are.
Yeah.
So like I said, I mean, they're going to be highlighted on page 1.
Are your pages blank too, Kyle?
Hmm?
Is your page blank?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, hers is 2. I was noticing.
I just thought it was my computer that.
No, it's blank on page 1.
We'll bring this back for a second reading. No, and really and truly, the only thing that we had even looked at that was optional was the intermittent leave. That was the only thing. There wasn't anything else that we could strike out. It was all according to law.
I wouldn't think you'd want to do intermittent anyway, just because of exposure risk with COVID.
Was another one of our discussions.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, okay.
All right, so any other discussion on that list of policies? Not, item 18 is approved motion to enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining and to discuss the compensation of a public employee. Justin moves, second. Brandon seconds. Roll call.
There's no discussion, there will be no action taken afterwards.
Mr. Renier,
Yes.
Mr. Kern,
Yes.
Mrs. Psalm,
Yes.
Mrs. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
Already seen.
I know. Maybe keeps it in here, there's like several bounds. We're staying.
Yes, Mr. Dick was staying in here. correct?
Yes.